Counselor Evans, I believe you're present. I don't see your video up, but if you could confirm, please.
Oh, what was that?
I'm not sure if Director Hill will be with us tonight or not. His mother passed.
Oh,
Or,
no.
I'm sorry, not his mother, his father-in-law.
Oh, dear.
I believe he is going to join. Anyway, so all council is accounted for. So we're ready to go when you are, Your Worship.
Okay. It's time, so we'll get right on to it. I'll ask for calling of the roll, please.
Thank you. Mayor Eady,
Present.
Reeve Eamon,
Present.
Councillor Coulis,
Present.
Councillor Evans. I see you. Councillor Hines,
Present.
Councillor Jemison,
Present.
Councillor Sydney.
Present.
We do have a quorum.
Yep. A declaration of opportunity interest in the general nature thereof. Hearing none. Okay. We'll get on to our first motion. First of all, good evening, everyone. Sorry, I forgot about that.
Evening.
First motion is that Stephen Fournier appear before council to present the municipal structure review final draft report dated September 1st, 2020. Need a mover, please. Councillor Hines, second by Councillor Jemison. So now ask Mr. Fournier to give us his report.
Thank you, Mayor Eady and members of council. I don't know how much detail you want me to dive into. And so I will probably highlight as much as I can that I think is important. But if through you, Your Worship, if there is something missing or a question raised, I'd be happy to answer it then so that we could make sure that each member of council has the information they'd like to have on the matter.
Okay, just one second. I'm not sure if everyone can hear you. I'm having a wee bit of problem hearing you.
Are you? I'll turn up my volume a bit. Does that help?
That helps, yes.
Good, okay. The rest of council, is it working for you as well now? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
fine.
Good, thank you. Sorry about that. All right, well, first of all, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you on this matter. COVID-19 certainly stretched things out longer than we planned. But in the end, I think we're all adapting, including the style of meeting that's being held these days. I'm still trying to get used to it. I don't know how the rest of you feel about it, but in any event, it works and we can get business done. I thought I would start, Your Worship, just with a quick executive summary. First of all, that's found in the first couple of pages. And what I wanted to say was that really the report is broken up into two parts. Part A, which deals with the administrative structures, and Part B, which was really the governance or the council decision-making structures. And what we do in terms of the finding and the analysis in Part A, I can say in terms of summary, an executive summary, that the conclusion that was reached is that the overall policy management role performed by the current SMT model was not found to be working, and I'll elaborate in detail on that point. This is not a unanimous finding. I want to be very clear about that point. And some members still, and rightly so, I respect that, consider the SMT to be a very effective and an efficient management model. And there are certain aspects of it that one could not argue otherwise. There is, however, in my opinion, a need to move to a chief administrative based structure that would provide the necessary management oversight and leadership to meet the needs of the organization and also improve the overall performance. And so the actions in the plan are sort of framed around these generalized recommendations. What we're trying to achieve here is an effective CAO leadership and management team model for the delivery of the town's services. Hopefully we provide you with a clear indication of the necessary corporate, human, and financial resources to support the administrative management structure proposed. I want to We wanted to establish a step-by-step strategy to transition from the current model to the proposed CAO model to improve the structure. We wanted to have conduct at least some form of analysis, including the financial aspects of it, of the current and the optional departmental structures, and provide some recommendations for your consideration. Fifthly, and most importantly, the objective here was to put together a plan that would prioritize the development and implementation of the necessary tools such as strategic planning, service reviews, and performance in terms of individual staffing and corporate performance goals and objectives once council also approves the administrative structure. They're all linked, they're all tied, and they all work together in the long run. In part B, the findings of the analysis confirm that the current governance structure is really deemed to be effective, and it works for most members of the organization. And so here, the actions and the recommendations are going to be framed around key improvements to the current council governance structure to enhance functionality of the decision-making process. There may be some other refinements and that sort of thing, but that's generally the executive sort of summary, your worship and members of council. The actions, of course, are summarized in the plan that's set out in section 4 to the report. But before we get there, I think I'd like to just pick it up and move through the report, each section of the report. Section 1 really was all about putting together the work plan and the key tasks. So on page 4, you'll see, and it moves on to page 5, there were really 5 major stages designed to complete this project based on the RFP that was issued last November. The first stage was to collect and review the relevant information. Second stage was to develop a questionnaire and to do a preliminary assessment of the strengths and weaknesses of the current structures in the organization, which involve all members of council, involve the senior management team members, and also the library CEO. We also had a look at resource supports for succession planning, the external recruitment, and different things like that that'll come into play in generalized terms in the recommendation. We also looked at standard organizational planning and performance tools, and we also wanted to have a look at developing appropriate municipal comparators in this stage, which with the help of each member of council, 3 were chosen. And I'll talk about that as we move on. So part 3, it's all in my hand, conduct a detailed analysis of the findings in the preliminary assessment and prepare recommendations on the options for improvements. And that would include the financial implications with the use of the appropriate municipal comparators, and then develop a transitional strategy with processes that would support and help the town move forward on the recommendations. Step 4 is what we're doing this evening. Prepare and deliver, and then obtain feedback through a presentation of the draft report to council and SMT. And lastly, I will deliver to you any changes that are necessary, and there would be a final report either presented or delivered based on your wishes to the town council. In the end, again, I wish to thank all members of council for participating, and the senior management team and the CAO, particularly in view of the fact that we had to go through the virtual process. I really enjoy face-to-face meetings and communications and conversations, but the reality was, the responses, in my opinion, were as equally candid, they were forthright, and extremely helpful in the production of this report, as if I had actually conducted in person. So it worked, in my opinion, and in terms of the technology. The methodology on page 6 is really just a 4-step plan. And I just wanted to highlight that again. It just summarizes very briefly what I talked about in terms of the steps just now. We have doing the background documentation, the interviews, do the preliminary assessment, and then the detailed analysis in the 3rd stage, and then develop in the 4th stage the recommendations. And again, this was framed around the RFP that was issued by the town last fall. Just to make a few comments before we dive into the details, the findings and the recommendations focus on both the critical issues that require immediate attention and those matters that will require attention during, and in some cases beyond, the current term of council. And as I mentioned before, there's two parts. Part A focuses on the administrative management, while B addresses the governance decision-making structure and functions. And with respect to the original requirement, I just wanted to make a note of this to examine shared services under the contract. The town did join other area municipalities under a separate RFP, known as commonly referred to as the LEG proposal or LEG review. And so this requirement to address this matter in any detail in my report was removed virtually by that RFP. However, and it's important, the findings ultimately are linked to what you have in front of you in many areas, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And so the initial concept of looking at those things was the right idea. You just now have two reports that are doing that in terms of moving ahead with your recommendations. Any questions about process, about the approach, that sort of thing at this stage, Mr. Mayor Edie, from members of council? Okay, good. So we had a look then through the interview process and had a look at the current administrative structure and its findings. What amazed me, because I was corrected on this point, this model has been in place for 30 years, and I didn't realize that. That's a long time, and that's something that one can't just sort of overlook or dismiss, because obviously, and I'll talk a little bit about it, it worked, and in its place and in its time, it certainly worked. The important thing, as we dived into the details, is that we began to understand a little bit better about how the SMT model worked. And it's defined in an employment contract with each director. And the compensation in turn is based on the departmental responsibilities that each director has, as well as the collective assignment of the CA roles and responsibilities as defined under the Municipal Act. And we'll talk about those in a little more detail. So together, the departments had fulfilled the legislative duties of a chief administrative officer, as it's spelled out in the contract. And they also may, your staff department heads are, as it would be in any other contract, required to perform any other duty that you assign as council to that each and every one of them. You have a contract in place, but that ran from the January 1st to 2015 to December 2019, and under a bylaw that was approved by council in May of 2017. The contract itself contains provisions for renewal, and again, we'll talk a little bit about what that means when we get to the recommendations in the end. Page 8 just provides a little bit of a graphic description of the current SMT model, and the participants, describes the participants. The strengths. Here's what was important to anybody and everyone I spoke to when it came time to assess the SMT model. And as I said, operational for 30 years. And there's certainly a strong consensus that over time, it emerged as a highly functional, cross-departmental structure, where all department managers worked well together and got the job done. And there were many examples cited during the course of the review of what had been achieved under this model. Under it, the managers attend council meetings, all of them. And what that does, in my opinion, is it provides the organization with an effective connection between staff and members of council. And for many in the organization, it's viewed as a very cohesive administrative structure, where there's shared departmental cost-saving measures, such as women's training and things like that. And also, through this model, you spawned a very effective capital works construction program over the years, including, for example, the recent assumption of your waste management operations and that sort of that as well. So there have been many achievements. One of the key strengths often cited was the direct connection between all managers and council members, where elected members and management can interact directly at any time. In the opinion of many, the structure fosters an open door policy, and it's viewed as an effective working relationship that works well in a small town for both members of council and the community. SMT also provides one meaning a member of council, a member of the public, whatever it might be, with a direct point of contact relating to any matter, where answers to questions and firsthand advice is there with the professional experience that accompanies it. It's readily available. And then gaining an appreciation of historical background information and things like that is also helpful when you think of the directors that you have in place right now. So the continuity between present, past, and moving forward is a model that has fostered that sort of continuity. SMT meets weekly, and the structure allows for more than one person's input. The directors are all working managers, so that represents in many people's views good value to the community. And in comparison, SMT is also viewed by many in the organization as a more efficient management model, where the additional layers of, say, administration that might be associated with a CAO role or CAO management role are considered to be more costly and more time consuming. We'll talk about those points. And then generally, for those, particularly those in the organization who feel very strongly about the supportive side of the SMT, the current level of human resources and supports and staffing and training were in place. And I think it's fair to say, Mayor Eadie and members of council, that generally speaking, in terms of money set aside for staff training and things like that, it certainly seemed to be reasonably adequate and that sort of thing. And there's been a good sort of policy and practice to follow that piece of it. But there are weaknesses. And during the course of the interviews, we found a number of things. And SMT has its challenges now. And in many ways, what may seem as a strength to one member of council or one member of the organization may be seen by another as a weakness. And we'll talk a little bit about that. The biggest concern seemed to be that SMT isn't really appearing to, at least has the appearance of not functioning as a team. I'm sure that there's functioning elements in place. In some cases, issues were falling through cracks. And sometimes when there isn't a consensus reached at an SMT meeting to move forward on a matter, then there can be a real disconnect develop, where on occasions directors appear to be moving in different directions and things like that. The lack of a unified voice is often attributed to, well, and that's not uncommon, the protection of departmental interests rather than working on a corporate-wide solution. And with SMT, if it proceeds, even if it can't come to a census, I'm sorry, I'd like to backtrack on that point. Directors, in the end, can walk away and do what they feel is necessary if they can't reach or have received direction to reach a conclusion and step forward together. And that has proven to be frustrating for those members who have a strong desire to and need to work as one. Under the current model, the opportunities to correct this issue, in my opinion, aren't easy. And it really would require a constant effort to function as one voice, if that's possible. The failure of SMT to move forward is also, in many respects, in my professional opinion, can be tied to the lack of adequate human resources and administrative supports. All directors are working hands-on managers. And while a robust capital works program has been developed, operations are very lean, and SMT managers are often caught up in minutia at times that really, in the end, precludes any real opportunity to focus on organizational leadership, or certainly gets in the way. In the current departmental structure, too many managers are working directly in operations while trying to manage the operations at the same time. And so, with so many responsibilities, it is difficult to devote the time to the overall management and oversight of the organization as contemplated under the employment contract. In addition, the application by SMT members of the human resource policies is found to be in instances not always consistent. And in addition to that, additional staff resources and supports in areas such as human resources would add, in my opinion, a greater value to the overall performance of the management team and the organization. I want to say something though here, as hard as that sounds, as good as any organization is, and I've been part of them, and I've been as guilty as anyone else as a CAO, it's not uncommon to fall off the track. I don't want to over stress the point, but on the other hand, I'm talking about leadership and management to stay on track. The lack of a single point of contact between council and staff is also in many respects a bit frustrating. The reality is council members can move from one director to another one in search of an answer. And there can be in the end some confusion or conflicting directions. And it also touches upon something important, which we'll talk about. It becomes a key recommendation in the end, that following procedures and working relationships as they're defined in the procedures are not always respected or followed. Now that can happen under any model. It doesn't necessarily have to be SMT. It can be any model, but that's an issue that surfaced certainly. There also seem to be some concerns about the efficiency of the structure. And there could be, in some instances were cited in the duplication of services, and equipment was one example relating to such things as grass cutting. And the other problem identified is within the SMT itself, the lack of any real leader to reach an agreement or consensus is evident or becoming more evident within the structure. The lack of a corporate oversight role also contributes to the processes and procedures not being followed. And a lot of energy can be spent just trying to move something forward to no avail at times, and that's difficult. The concern may also be compounded by the absence of a plan or vision or priorities that establish a path forward. And we'll talk about strategic plans and corporate planning and that sort of thing. So again, we cannot simply point the finger at the structure and the individuals in the structure. There are tools and things that are very important to support it and make it work effectively that also need to be dealt with and addressed. So it's not just people, it's also processes and important things that need to be accomplished as well. I think in the end, that for many members of the organization, there is a sense that it is no longer as efficient or as effective as it was over time. And how do I place it? The working relationship that's important between management and council came into question, and that was recently exacerbated by a move to alter the composition of SMT through the Human Resources Committee as well. And so it's clear that there's need to fix and in many respects. In the end, probably one of the bigger concerns too attached to this is the urgent need to carefully assess the administrative structure. It's also driven by the fact that all of the current directors will be in a position to retire commencing this year and over the next 3 to 5 years, or perhaps slightly longer, but certainly a 5-year window is a reasonable window to expect most of the retirements to have transpired, taken place, and move on. There's also been recent turnovers in some of the middle management positions as well, which raise some concerns about gaps that are created in training. About training and funding and positions leaving for other jobs. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. Anyway, the analysis. There's 3 models, we've talked about it. There's the SMT, there's the CAO departmental management model, which could be CAO clerk, treasurer, engineer, whatever it might be, and a dedicated CAO position. Of the 3 options, it became very clear that SMT is unique. And there are very few working examples, which make it difficult to undertake any real hardcore comparative analysis and how the model works using other municipalities. For example, even the town of Port Hope, which relied on the model since 2015, has made the decision to return to its full CAO model this fall. And there are press releases and that sort of thing. The other point that becomes important in the analysis is the employment contract that Council approved in 2017. Town councils assigned the legislative duties of the CAO role under the Act and to each of the 5 directors. And in doing so, SMT was collectively charged with the shared responsibility. And that sharing would change, and it wasn't each of them performed 20% of the role. It was those who could do what they could do did it as well. The compensation then also was set up and queued around this dual role of the shared responsibility for the CAO responsibilities, as well as the directorship role that each member on SMT plays for their functional areas. So that too is important to take note of as we move forward. There's no question that as I said earlier, it worked well over the years, but the concerns over the lack of oversight and leadership in the management of the town's affairs, in my opinion, has really reached a point where it's not functioning properly. There are many reasons, but the central issue in my opinion, is that the members of SMT do not have the time to collectively manage the town's affairs. On paper, everyone's in charge, but in reality, no one really is. And there is very much a need for a manager, one who would be assigned those roles, the CAO roles and responsibilities, to address several areas that require attention. And these areas were raised during the course of the interviews, as well as the analysis. And it's the establishment, and these things are important, very important. The establishment and achievement of council's priorities. Improve communications across the organization to ensure council's directions and approvals filtered down through the organization. Placing someone in charge who has the time to oversee departmental operations, manage and keep people on track, and then ensures policies and processes are consistently applied across the entire organization. Fourthly, the provision of a leadership role that fosters both a cohesive management team and an administrative structure, team leader. And then the development and facilitation of a corporate plan with measurable goals and objectives for the municipality and staff. And it's not that the town hasn't attempted to undertake those initiatives. Talk about that in more detail. You have, and you're to be applauded for making those initiatives. The point I'm going to make in the recommendations is it's time to pick it up and move forward. The creation of a more efficient and effective council staff reporting relationship with one point of contact for a clear and proper chain of command in the administrative structure would also be very helpful here. And the need to improve accountability in the oversight of departmental operations, both at the departmental and the overall corporate levels within the organization. So it's twofold. We want to make sure that the departments are accountable for what they carry out, but we also want to make sure that overall the management team corporately is also accountable. So in my opinion, the current SMT model is not designed or robust enough to tackle all of these matters at this point. And that becomes a matter for council's consideration and deliberation as well. The directors by necessity must devote their time to both operations and often require hands-on attention to both the operational and administrative tasks, and then the management of the respective services. That's a full day, I can tell you. Moreover, some directors are required to perform administrative tasks, and other directors are relying on other parts of the organization for administrative support as well, and we'll talk about that. The reality is here that the approach to managing the respective departments is good on one hand. There's no question having one actively involved, hands-on, knowing what their operation is about is a good thing. That's important. That's very important. But the problem here, as I see it, is in reality, it leaves little time to adequately perform the CAO duties that were assigned under the contract. And that's to ensure in a collective manner that the efficient and effective operation of the municipality. And there's just no consistent administrative management oversight or leadership across the organization under SMT at the moment. it's success, and there has been success in the past, depends on the personalities and the people involved in many, many ways. If the town wishes to move forward, and it's certainly my recommendation that you do to address these gaps, then the optional model, CAO models, really do merit consideration. The most common ones are, as we've talked about quite a bit, and they're depicted on page 13, is the combined managerial role and also the full CAO position as well. Council members expressed concern that by moving away from the current SMT model, one of the critical strengths most often cited regarding it was the ease of access and availability of immediate information on any of the town's services. The fear is by creating another layer that would disappear because of that additional layer of management attached to the CAO options. Based on my experience as both a lower tier and an upper tier county CAO, well, that's a legitimate concern. The reality is that with proper procedures and protocols in place, that you can maintain that ease of direct access for information purposes at any time in any organization. And I think that needs to be dealt with in terms of a procedural piece that would be helpful. It was also noted that the town would incur additional costs if it moved to the CAO option, and a valid concern. I cannot argue the point. It does, plain and simple. As part of the analysis, we had a look at Carleton Place, Smiths Falls, and Arnprior as the comparators. And the idea here was we wanted to really just look at the financial implications through a review of the cumulative department head costs associated with each of the administrative structure options and the current SMT using these comparators. So this analysis, in many ways, on the following page, and we'll talk about it, is not necessarily about salaries per se or detailed job descriptions, but really it's just about the costs of administrative systems. That's what options I was trying to get at. And it's really necessary for a number of reasons. And again, I have to highlight this point because it's important. The town's SMT salary rates are unique in the marketplace due to the combined departmental management and general control of the affairs of the municipality under the CAO responsibilities that have been assigned to each of them. One of the few reliable comparators, the municipality of Port Hope no longer manages its affairs through the SMT model. And more importantly, the salary rates for the town's SMT are linked to the job rates for the fire chief. And that was very evident in the Town of Brent Peru Compensation Review final report done by Gallagher in November of this year. And we must be mindful of what it says here. And which in turn, this report identified the fire chief, for example, its position is influenced by the awards that happen within the fire services. And there's some examples given here. At the present moment, you have captains in your system. Other places I could not find a reliable comparator with the captain piece. The closest I could get was lieutenants in the Smiths Falls piece, and it's not the same. But from a relative measuring stick point of view, it does allow us to get a sense of the general costs of the different structures. The overview of the current and the optional structures financial in the following page is summarized. The data, I had to do some adjustments with the data, but overall, I think it's self-explanatory. And using that data, we looked at the 3 scenarios, and that's page 15. It's that landscape chart, and it's figure 301AB, and it's called the wage salary comparisons. And when I reflect back and look at that, it's really more about the organizational structure comparisons per se. But anyway, when we have a look at, say, for example, scenario number 1, the full administrative officer model, we can see that for the comparators, it runs from a figure of about 603,000 up to about $749,000 a year between the 3 of them. That's the general sort of layout of the cost for a full CAO model of through the comparators. If we were to assign a CAO role to one of these positions within the town of Renfrew, one of the senior man, I'm sorry, a CAO role to the current structure, then we would see that, and this is where the cost realities, which were mentioned, come into play. And you're certainly looking at anywhere from $750,000 to $156,000 increase in salaries and wages, relatively speaking, by moving to that structure. Under scenario 2, when you look at the combined piece, the town's costs are certainly more in line with the current CAO model costs. So if you went with a combined model where you took, and in this case, I simply used, I believe it was the director of development and works. I used that range and assigned that position and assigned the marketplace CAO values, and it came up with that figure of 621 versus the full CAO models of which are all slightly, not quite. Smith Falls is just slightly about the same. But anyway, in a relative terms, there is some cost savings there to be achieved, or there are not cost savings, my apologies. The costs to move in that direction are certainly less than moving to a full CAO model, just being front and honest about that. In the end, if we look at the SMT model, its current costs run around $606,000 a year to $689,000, and that is in line with the full CAO model. So for the town to proceed and maintain the SMT model, the costs of doing so are equivalent to the costs of other communities with full CAO models in place. If we could come back then to the SMT employment contract and the link to the salary ranges and the fire services, that's reflected in the chart that we just looked at. And the cost to maintain the town's SMT structure falls within the salary ranges, as I mentioned, of the CAO structures for all of the full CAO structures for the comparators. And if you move to the combined model, the costs, additional costs, were in the neighborhood of 15 to 20,000, while the full CAO model added another 143 to 167 to the department head annual salary ranges when you dive in and put it all together. From a financial perspective, obviously, a move to the combined position is probably the most cost-effective strategy. But given the dual roles of both the departmental and the overall corporate oversight role, the time devoted to the latter role will have limitations. That's just a simple reality, and you need to be aware of that in this instance. And as such, consideration should be given, in my opinion, to a strategy that would transition the town from the SMT structure to the full CAO model by initially moving to the combined model. We'll talk a little bit better in the immediate future, and there are reasons for that. And then seeing the full implementation of the full CAO option taking place during the remainder of the term of this council. And this strategy would provide both council and SMT some times to begin to plan for and work through the relevant matters that relate to the employment contract and other things that we'll talk about when we talk about the specific recommendations. Particularly the retirements as they begin to unfold between now and over the next 5 years. So it's a transitional plan in terms of moving forward. There were opportunities for efficiencies could be realized through departmental consolidations or realignments. And I had a look, and at one point I honestly had thought, I wonder if we could look at recreation and then also have a look at development and works. In the end, the common model out there seemed to be more in line with the administrative functions and the financial functions, such as a consolidation of the clerking and the financial operations under one director. And that's very common in Ironprior, for example. And it was also common until just recently in the town of Smith Falls. if you were to look at something like that, then facilitating that change you'd need to move the EDO officer to a direct report, say, for example, to the CAO, once the CAO model is in place. And also a realignment of the building and planning functions as middle management positions reporting to council through a corporate services model might work, and it should be given some consideration. And Smith Falls is a good working example of that particular part. But again, we'll add some codicils to that one in terms of the leg project in a minute. And then the other point that came up was interesting was that in various communities now, the requirements for your public works director or management have changed for many years now. That change has been taking place from that of a fully certified professional engineer to that of a certified engineering technician, and perform that management role. And that's not an uncommon management model in place anymore. You'll find that in many places. And with retirements occurring the way they are within Renfrew, I'd certainly be thinking that that would be important to look at as you work through this. Now, realigning some of the functions in Renfrew would support the move to the model, but we also need to take into account that further savings may materialize if these two positions form part of a plan for sharing services with other municipalities through the leg and that sort of thing. So as I said, we want to keep an eye on that. Okay. There's some salary indications provided for the reduced clerk role and also the engineering qualification role there that you can have a look at on page 17. What's important here is the salary adjustments are really based on data from the municipal comparators, and they have limitations. You recently completed a compensation review in November of 2019. And if there's any desire to move forward to a CAO-based model, it will be important that the firm or a qualified firm be re-engaged to assess the changes in the job content so that as you move forward on both one or the other CAO models. That's going to be a critical step because, again, it's going to be based on the organization as opposed to the marketplace because you are different in terms of that situation. And that will be important in terms of a procedural step to move there. What it'll do is to ensure that the factors that influence managerial compensation for the town are taken into account and the new jobs are properly placed on the town's wage grid. So if there's going to be changes, you got to make sure those are dealt with. And it's also linked to the SMT employment contract and the impending retirements. And so changes, these things need to be timed or phased accordingly. And moreover, any savings that might be accrued to these changes, if we're offsetting, say, for example, the directorship costs for engineering and that sort of thing, quite frankly, I've got to be perfectly frank and honest up top, would be offset by the administrative support and staff report resources that are recommended further in the report. If SMT remains as the managerial model, then it really will have to become more transparent and accountable. And part of that transparency and accountability in its management would be for making sure that council is informed and that there's a sharing of what is being done at that level with council back and forth, so that things like agendas and minutes and regular reports and that sort of thing would be the first basic step to begin to repair that working relationship. In the end, I'm not sure that SMT, to be quite frank, could achieve all of the things that this report is identifying as important to the organization to move ahead. Anyway, the management structure is depicted on page 18. And again, this is a proposed structure. It will require some thinking and some additional analysis over time as things unfold. The current and optional administrative structure recommendations then are summarized as follows on page 18. And that's council adopt and implement a strategy that would transition the town from the SMT structure to the full CO model by 1, initially moving to the combined CAO management model in the immediate future through a search and the selection of a suitable internal candidate. I think that there's enough experience in your organization that that would work. And then secondly, proceed with the implementation of the full CAO option through an internal and external competition during the term of this council, using, and in many cases, I find this helpful and appropriate, external recruitment resources. Expertise at this level and finding the right candidate is not easy. And with that kind of help, it makes the task easier. Secondly, the council and staff explore opportunities for efficiencies that may be realized through departmental consolidations or realignments of certain functions, directors' qualifications, and the shared services with other municipalities under the LEG project. And the examples we've already talked about, we've cited them, a consolidation, for example, of clerk and treasurer functions, a realignment of the building and planning functions, a changing of the requirement for qualifications in engineering, and then the changing of reporting relationships for EDOs to the CAO once the latter position would be in place. The third part of the third recommendation would be that council, together with staff, seek the appropriate HR legal advice with respect to the timing for retirements and the current employment terms for each SMT member before proceeding with the above CAO model transition strategy and any changes to the departmental structures, because the agreements have specific terms. And while that agreement that's in place ended on December 31st, 2019, the agreement does make provision for renewal, and I'm not a human resource lawyer. I cannot give you an opinion about that. You'll need expertise to help you work your way through that. The other point is that council engaged the qualified firm. Perhaps it's the firm you used for the compensation review completed last November to ensure that the changes to the management model, administrative management model, and the department structure approved by council is properly evaluated and placed in the town's salary grid then as well. So those are important steps. That's the administrative model recommendations, Mayor Eadie and members of council. Is there any further any discussion on that, or would you like me to move ahead with the administrative support findings?
Any questions or comments, council? Revimo.
Thank you. With regards to item 3A1 subset 3 about the appropriate legal advice, I think a simplistic view would be that you could just go ahead and change your job description and roll back wages. But that's, I think Elgin or in Elgin County or somewhere recently, I'm going to say in the last 5 years, that was tried, and there's a legal opinion that says it's constructive dismissal. So I think, Steve is very much correct to say that we need to seek advice, prior to offering any kind of comments on any of this stuff. Firstly, and then secondly, as you plot your way through, as council plots its way through implementation.
Yes.
Any other questions or comments, council? Okay, hearing none, Ms. Fortier, you can proceed.
All right, thank you. All right, the resource supports. What we found is that here, I took into such, what we had to look at was staffing, training, and training and development programs, and the financial supports that are typically required in any municipal organization. During the course of the interviews, what we discovered is it really was apparent that while the level of support does vary between departments, the concerns over key administrative resources are common to many of the departments and apply throughout the organization. And I wanted to make a point here, as sort of obscure as it might sound, that in any municipality, the defined roles and responsibilities that are performed by staff and council members are distinct. We understand that. You each have your role to play, your legislative role. And consequently, the resource supports that are unique to the administrative and council governance structures are also examined separately in this report. However, the approval of policies by council and the implementation of policies by staff are by their very nature linked. And as you'll have probably seen, in many manners, in this particular case, certain resource supports are essential to both structures and are common to both. So the strengths in the current organization is that there was a sense by many, or by some, that the staffing levels and resource supports were adequate. And what I found reasonably adequate actually was the amount of money set aside for training and development. I don't think you can debate that at all. It looked good, it looked healthy. And you also have some shared outside and internal staff resources, and cross training is there. It may not always get you where you want to be, but the initiatives are there. Examples included the clerk's department, the treasurer, and the recreational departments. The weaknesses really, all members of the organization do not share the view that these supports are adequate. Some departments are considered sufficiently staffed, while others are lacking in day-to-day support. Where, for example, some of the managerial staff, and I referenced that earlier, in certain departments, and clerk and finance is a good example, are doing a lot of administrative work. And other departments, such as recreation and development and works, rely heavily on administrative support from that, say, for example, the finance department and that sort of thing. So they're leaning heavily on certain parts of the organization. Other things that were noted, corporate policies needed to be updated. Well, I acknowledge it, and it's here in the report, but that's a fact that any municipality is constantly addressing that. So that's not just simple good municipal practice. You'll continue with it and get them updated when you can get the resources in place to move ahead. IT support, there was some talk about it, lack of consistency. And again, in my view, I did not take a lot of time to jump into this one, because I think that the LEG report and working with other municipalities and other sources would help this, the particular issues. But the largest issues by far relate to the lack of adequate human resource supports, and that's staffing and corporate policy application. And the application of skills training and education and development programs, not the funding, but the application. And so there's some issues that surfaced. There was a lack of consistency in applying human resource policies. There was a lack of support to address the demand for consistent approaches in HR matters. And then there was no specific HR functions assigned to either department or a director with the authority to deal with HR matters through the entire organization. Right now, that function rests with the treasurer, who works through the HR committee, and HR matters are complex. They're time consuming, which in turn puts a great deal of strain on this director. And not for a moment am I saying or being critical of the director or the role he's played. I can only say, having been in the trench, that's a difficult role and a function to be assigned, and try carrying out your own workload and departmental workload with that one as well. Employee recognition programs and events designed to celebrate employee productivity and successes are presently not carried out. And I'm not going to elaborate on this one, but other than to recommend you move forward. Application of skills development, education, and training policies and programs is really left to each director. And as such, it's not consistently applied across the organization, nor is there for many a clear path to follow on how it would work. When structures and processes are in place, you can begin to address that. In addition, there was a question raised, which again can be addressed with the proper staffing, that the application of funds for these programs should be updated to cover situations where recently trained employees have left the town for other job opportunities. And that's a standard. Again, while that came up a few times, you simply put a provision in that deals with a timeline for the earning of the grant or the money that was applied for the training and development. It's common, easy to do. So the analysis here really comes down to two things in the end. And the lack of a dedicated human resource support constitutes, in my opinion, a very large gap in the administrative structure. And various municipalities, including Iron Prayer, do have means of fulfilling it. There's some supervisory positions, obvious, say within Arnprior. Smith Falls and Carleton Place have coordination roles that help this function with within their finance and clerk departments, respectively. In Renfrew's case, the new CAO model, in my opinion, would serve as a good home to provide the managerial oversight of this resource. And that responsibility should be assigned as part of council's approval of the CAO options. A new position should be created within the organization, provided, and I underline this, that the opportunity to share this function with one or more municipalities through the LEG project does not materialize, or it does not prove to be an effective model for you, or an external resource is not available by contract and that sort of thing. So it's important that you assess all of your options from the get-go before you actually select the final one. But whatever happens, rest the function within the CAO model, in my opinion. That's critical. The resource position would assist the CAO in ensuring there's a consistent application of all HR policies and procedures relating to all matters, including skills, training, and development. The second part was that in the interviews, many managers are spending too much time in administrative tasks. One of the prime examples that surfaced was connected actually to the committee or the governance structure, where each manager is spending upwards of 100 hours annually, and the clerk's involvement is even greater. And it really is seen as a fairly big waste, to be frank, of management time when you think about the tasks that are being performed, the administrative tasks performed to support the committee function. Now, I've also taken into account in making that comment that I do understand that the development and works and recreation and clerks departments do have office administration support. I'm not speaking, suggesting for a moment they don't. But the use of managerial time is really too valuable. And to adequately meet the scope of services and relieve staff that can reach a breaking point, a managerial staff person or position, and also acknowledge the need for support, a dedicated council committee meeting secretariat recorder, whatever we want to call this position, would be very helpful, because it would allow, first of all, managers to manage. And secondly, the second additional benefit would be that a consistent formats and processes for committee agendas, reports, that sort of thing could be developed through this position and through the clerk's department, and make it a much more efficient and effective model. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. That was seen as the second largest gap. Now, one of the problems I have when I look and read this is that I really didn't give you any indication as to whether or not this is part-time or full-time. And we really should give that some indication, some assessment, or some evaluate that initially if council is going to consider moving ahead with this. Frankly, your managerial staff that are in place certainly can provide you with that data, but if you wanted something from me, I'd be happy to work that out in terms of just a general sense or a general feeling at the moment, and add it to the report. And then, as I said, the one gap that really jumped out at me was enhancing workplace, the workplace by establishing employee recognition programs. So our recommendations here are threefold. One, that council address the lack of dedicated human resource HR support as follows: that this responsibility for this function should be assigned to and form part of council's approval of the CAO roles and responsibilities, and a new human resource position. And that position that's missing here in this report should also, it could read contract or shared services, should be created within the organization or with the help of other municipalities. So that there would be, oh, sorry, I'm rambling. Let me just read this. My apologies to you. A new human resource position should be created within the organization, provided the opportunity to share the function with one or more municipalities through LEG doesn't materialize, or the opportunity to secure an external resource is not readily available, then we should turn to look at that. But at the present moment, expertise would be important. Contractor or shared would be a good first step in this position. And the next, that council addressed the need for additional administrative support for the management team by establishing a dedicated council committee meeting secretarial recorder position. Wow, it's a long term, but anyway. To ensure that the development heads, the department heads can devote as much time as they can to management of their operations, and that the position reside within the clerk's department under the clerk's jurisdiction, so that the policies of council meetings and committee meetings and procedures are all handy and there, and additional oversight through the clerk's department is going to be helpful. And then thirdly, I'm repeating it, but employee recognition. Really, really important. And it's been busy and crazy times, but I would heartily encourage you to work on something like that, a program like that, for staff morale and just celebrating the good work that your staff does each year. So those are the recommendations under the administrative support piece, Mayor Eadie. Are there any questions here?
Hey, council, any questions, comments?
I think you have 2 members of council, maybe more.
Sorry, I think I was on mute there, sorry. Reeve Emo and then Councillor Evans.
Thank you. The recommendation around the meeting secretariat recorder, you know, it might also be a consideration for council to tie that to some kind of researcher as well, because oftentimes when we get new information in or information from other municipalities asking for endorsement, we're a little reluctant to do it because we don't, you know, you only have the motion, whereas it'd be nice to have the background report that went with it, or at the very minimum, someone who could say, you know, I found 5 of these similar motions across the province, and this is what they're after. So I think, you know, I think that position could perform another useful role in terms of researching for council, so that independent or individual department heads could offer detailed report with background.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Councillor Evans?
Thank you. Stephen, your report is rather intense. It's 50 pages. There is an awful lot of information and also your suggestions. To do justice, I think even council should come together a few times just to maybe go over what exactly we're looking at here and how we can sort of make it sense. Just quickly, your overview today, it would look like we would be dealing with almost 3 new hires, an HR, the CAO position, and as well the there was a third person, sorry, but there's a lot to consider and an awful expense to the town. But
Yes.
again, it's going to take an awful lot for myself just to sort of digest this. I've been familiar with this system, which to me has worked well for the past 11 years. And to looking at something different is always, change will always be difficult. But again, open to your suggestions, and thank you for your work.
Councillor Hines?
Yeah, I just want to add a little bit to Reeve Emon's comments that the secretariat recorder position, we have spoke about, you know, someone in the media kind of role where they would be updating the website and Twitter and all of the things that the summer student did, and we got a lot of mileage out of that. And, you know, if we should move forward tonight, we're going to be addressing the digital signs. And if we were to move forward with that, it is going to take someone. So I can see that position being very appropriate for the municipality. And, you know, if they are at meetings doing the recording, then that makes a lot of sense, because there's some cohesiveness there about the information and kind of where it got to, that when they set that up as a message to the public that they are in the know exactly about what it was because they were at the meeting doing the recording. I really thank you for this report. It's very well put together and I appreciate going over it and hearing the examples and hearing your findings. I think I agree with Councillor Evans for sure that this is the starting document for us to sit down and come together and say, this is where we want to go and this is how fast we want to go. I think there is an appetite for some change and direction. And some of this, I must say, we have great senior managers who are all very seasoned and very strong. And I think that in itself might create some of the tension there. As we discussed in our interview, Stephen, the start of this and how it got going and how effective it was at the first. And maybe it's fallen a bit off the rails now, but I think that, you know, the mayor and the members of council are very diligent in trying to, you know, have all the information they can to make the best decisions they can. And maybe at times that doesn't feel comfortable with some people because you're not totally in the know from certain departments, just because you don't sit on that committee or the reports that come to council, maybe you don't have as much background as you wish, although they're very well put together 99% of the time. But I really appreciate this, and I'm looking forward to, you know, discussing this in depth with the rest of council. And I think that some of the examples that you given certainly hit home with us, and they are what they are. That's how they happen, and that's what we want to address and keep things going. But for the most part, I think we're very fortunate that the town is moving in the direction it has with the people at the helm that are moving it forward. So we have a few little glitches, and I'm sure that's no different than any other municipality that should dealt with. But it is good to hear it from somebody else and have that captured for us, that this is the things we need to work on. Thank you.
Any other comments from council? Okay, hearing none. Mr. Fortune, thank you very much. Very good report. I think you've taken the comments you received from the interviews you had and put them together in a good, constructive way. I mean, we will have concerns, of course. You know, the one thing I will point out that when we talk dollars and cents, there's no benefits onto them numbers you provided. And with basically almost 3 new hires, we're probably talking a minimum $300,000 a year extra cost to the Renfrew went to a complete CAO system. And right at the present time, with COVID and not knowing what the government's going to hand out in future dollars and cents, I think it's something we need to sit down and study and look at over a period of time. And whatever. But again, thank you very much for your comments, and thank you very much for bringing this to us tonight. And Rebimo has another comment, I guess. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. There are some other, the findings and implementation plan at the back. So I guess, you know, that's something we'll have to review as a group. But, you know, I guess what I'm worried about is that we set this on the shelf and promise to come back to it in 3 weeks or 3 months, and it gets sideswiped by you know, the second round of COVID or something. So what I'd like to see at some point, whether it's tonight or next week or whatever, is that it get assigned to a committee to make sure that it's implemented or reviewed and not set off to one side. You know, I think one of the things we should remember about the CAO model is that and research from Tremblay in 2018 and Zarka in 17 and Mintzberg in 2000 and Siegel in 2010. The CAO leads up, which is to council, leads down, which is to staff, and then leads out into the community as well as into the other two levels of government. So I think, you know, without the CAO model, we have at least 5 senior managers performing that, and we have members of council that are taking it on at various times. So there's no wonder there's a diffusion of our message or confusion of the message. So I think it would be irresponsible for us to just sit on this. So I'd like to see, you know, this sent to a home somewhere, which would be either the HR committee or the admin committee. It's got to go somewhere. It can't just go up on shelf number 11 because it's just not, it's not appropriate. It's not right. We know there's some difficulties and challenges. That's why we commissioned this. That's why we commissioned having job descriptions so that we're able to start doing evaluations. That's why we started doing priority setting for committees this year. That allows us again to do some evaluations. Because prior to this, we didn't have the ability to evaluate anybody because we didn't know what the job descriptions were. We didn't know how to evaluate them. Plus, our evaluation tool is not a very user-friendly tool. So I think, you know, we really have to do something with this. So if it takes a motion in new business, I'm quite prepared to write one and send it around and bring it in under the procedural bylaw.
I think Councillor Hines, but before Councillor Hines, I don't disagree with that approach. I do think, though, this is something that all of council is aware of, and I think maybe it should be a committee, the whole committee, if we're going to have any kind of committee on this, because I think all 7 council members should be totally involved in it, and not just a recommendation coming from a committee that, you know. So I that's my take on it anyway. Councillor Hines.
You couldn't have said it better, Your Worship. I do agree that it belongs to all of council. I agree that we can't just set it aside and say we're going to deal with it. I think having, you know, a few regular or whatever it takes, committee, the whole meetings, that this is what we're dealing with. We're not, absolutely not putting anything else on that meeting of committee of the whole, but this is what we're going to deal with and sort out where we're moving forward. I'm not certainly in favor of it going to one committee or the other. I think that we're all in this together and we were all interviewed. So I think it's a report that we all need to deal with. And because there are some major financial implications here, and we all need to sort out where we might save something to get there.
Okay. Revimo?
That's fine. Now then the question should be, should we have a decision to extend Mr. Fournier's contract to allow him to assist us with this? Because if it just goes to council and we run around in circles for 2 hours on a Wednesday and then come back the following Tuesday and do the same thing, it's not effective, it's not efficient, and it's not going to go anywhere. So yeah, I think we really would need some kind of structured discussion around this, you know, internally or externally. But you know, just pushing it off to committee of the whole at the future isn't acceptable.
Okay. Mr. Fournier.
Mayor Edie, through you to all members of council, I couldn't agree more heartily that this is a combined committee of the whole, whatever approach you want to call it. That's very critical, important. Each and every one of you need to be part of the deliberations and the discussions on it, and from in my opinion. Secondly, if we're talking about maybe a meeting that would be facilitated in the same manner this one is for a couple of hours, let's just include it in the current contract. I appreciate, Reeve Iman, your proposal to add hours, but I built a few hours in to allow for some modifications in the end. So if that's what we're talking about, I'm quite willing to help once you've reached a point and you may have some issues that you really want just some further input on. I'd be happy to deliver that as part of the contract.
That's very much appreciated. And I think that's that would be very constructive if we do go into when we do go into a committee of the whole meeting, that you know, we have your input there because you've studied it all. You've heard from every council member, so that way, and you've heard from all the the managers as well. So you have the more information than everybody. So thank you very much for that. Okay, any other comments? Okay, well, hearing none, then thank you very much, Mr. Fournier. Well done report. Appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure, Mayor Edie and members of council. Thank you once again for the opportunity to work with you.
Night now.
Good evening.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. I guess we have to, all in favor of the report? Carried. Okay,
Mayor Edie, just so I'm clear, I did hear at the start of Mr. Fournier's presentation that minor modifications will be made and a final report can be issued. So I had contemplated doing a motion just to receive this, but I think what I gather is it'll be, stamped officially as final document and then council can receive, and perhaps at that meeting, the next meeting scheduled.
If I might, I think one of the pieces that I was going to bring up, I thought we are going to have a little fuller discussion, was when he noted administrative changes and stuff like that. I think I think council individually needs some training around running effective meetings, because when you look at some of the meetings and setting agendas, because some of the meetings go on quite long, and when I look at the minutes, I'm not sure that that's justified. So, I think council needs the confidence to be able to run. Individual members of council need the confidence to run their committee meetings, and with staff to set the agendas, and because sometimes information comes that's incomplete, and you have to be able to say no when the agenda is being set. So, that might be something you'd discuss with Mr. Fournier, Clerk Bilmer.
okay, anything else on this before we move on?
So are we just receiving this then, that we can speak with him again and sort out where we want to go and then stamp it final?
I guess that was my question. It's a draft report, a final draft. You can receive it. I think there's a bunch of recommendations. I don't know if you want to receive this, or do you want, again, to have a subsequent discussions, minor modifications, and then receive a final. And it really doesn't matter if you're receiving this. It's just documented as received, and you will have to make the determination of next steps.
I'm happy with receiving it.
Yes.
Okay, how about we then propose a motion, which we need to move in a second. The Renfrew Town Council receive the municipal structure review final draft report dated September 1st, 2020, as prepared by Fournier Consulting Services.
Okay. Moved by Reeve Emo, second by Councillor Hines. Any discussion? All in favor? Carried. Okay. Then, that the minutes of the special meeting of council held electronically on August 25th, 2020 be adopted as printed. Over, please. Reeve Emo, seconded by Councillor Evans. Any questions or comments on the minutes? Okay, hearing none. All in favor? Carried.
Mary, just so, if I could interrupt again, just for a moment, I apologize. Just in case you didn't see the notification come up, Councillor Sidney had to leave the meeting for another matter and apologizes, but Councillor Sidney is now absent from the meeting from this point forward.
Thank you very much. I didn't see that, no. Okay, that the minutes of the Committee of Adjustment Property Standards Committee meeting held August 12, 2020 be received. Mover, please.
Sure.
One second by Councillor Hines. Okay, I chaired that meeting. There was 2 items on it. One was, give me a second here. Those zone variants to allow a person to change the setback. on the property to construct a carport. The other one was a variance from the zoning bylaw, again, to allow for an addition to a house. I believe it like a granny suite type thing added onto a house. And both were adopted and recommended by committee. Any questions or comments? Revimo.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick question on 7.2. I'm assuming, is that the result of the changes to the Planning Act and intensification that approximately 4 years ago, which allows complete units to be added? Is this, and it's a little unclear, is this a separate structure or is it adjoining the existing structure?
I believe it's an adjoining the existing structure. I could ask Planner Withers if he wants to speak to it.
Yes, thank you, and through you, Mayor Eady, to Reeve Emo. So yeah, this is a second unit in the existing that will be attached to the existing dwelling. Our zoning bylaw does permit 2-unit dwellings, which is effectively a second unit but it has to be connected to the existing dwelling. So the Planning Act also contemplates second units being permitted in accessory buildings. We don't currently permit that. So, but you can have a second unit in an existing dwelling. But there are your lot has to be bigger and you need more frontage in order to do that. So a lot of existing lots with existing dwellings in town can't accommodate a second dwelling because you need 22 meters of frontage which is something like 70 feet, and you need more lot area. So at the end of the day, this is about providing relief to those requirements, and so yeah, it's essentially just allowing for a second unit where it would otherwise be permitted if the lot was a little bit bigger as of right.
Okay, Revimo.
Supplementary, and again, I'm not opposed to this. I'm just curious. But it's still retained, the ownership is still retained by one person. It's still one roll number or one PIN number. It's not a backhanded way of getting a condominium or a duplex.
Through you, Mayor Eady. No, this is going to be a 2 units on one lot. I think you'd be hard pressed. The way they're building this isn't a natural semi-detached dwelling. This is really just a really small, I think as Mayor Eady put it, it's kind of like a granny flat. It's purpose built for the applicant's mother.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor? Carry. Let the minutes of the Planning Advisory Committee meeting held August 12, 2020 be received. Mover, please. Councillor Hines, seconded by Councillor Evans. Turn over to Councillor Hines for her report. You're on mute, Councillor Hines.
Well, that's a good thing because I said it was held in October. This is the Planning Advisory meeting held Wednesday, August the 12th, 5:30 electronically we had it. And we had a delegation. Previously in our other minutes, we had a delegation about backyard chickens, which we spoke about in the past. And at that time, the committee felt that they needed further information. And we were able to get Al Dam from OMAFRA, from the provincial government, Ministry of Agriculture and Food and Rural Affairs, to attend. He's an expert in small flock poultry and anything to do with anything with feathers. He spoke to us about housing backyard chickens and emphasized that, several points that laying hens should be vaccinated, and there should be enforcement against selling ungraded eggs. Chickens are inherent to health risks associated with small flocks and consumption of ungraded eggs. He cited several things for us to consider, and as you read through the minutes, you will see that. We also had Jim McBain, who is presently our bylaw enforcement officer, and we do have a contract with him, and he has a contract with several other municipalities. So he is aware of some issues that have arisen in other municipalities that have backyard chickens. But he did mention that those are very strongly agricultural based municipalities, not such as town of Renfrew. And he's received several complaints in regard to noise, foul odor, wandering chickens, infestation of rodents, and basically the animal's health and welfare when it comes to the structural chicken coops, the structure of the chicken coops, and keeping them in the winter, and looking out for the animal's health in the winter. We did have a member of the public who was part of this electronic meeting when we were having our information session, and she pointed out to us that the city of Niagara Falls has experienced very few bylaw complaints. So that was her comment, and they've had backyard chickens for a number of years, but we are not the city of Niagara Falls. So we took into consideration the comments from Mr. Dam and from Mr. McBain, and came up with a resolution which will be before you tonight. The committee does not recommend to council that we change the small animals bylaw to include backyard chickens. And so that is coming before you tonight. Then we moved on to the planning advisory minutes of July the 7th, and they were already at council on August the 11th. We had a public meeting when it came to temporary garages, and again, that bylaw 62/2020 is before you tonight to amend bylaw 46/2010, and I'm sure the planner will go into great detail on that. Sorry, just when it comes to, we also had a public meeting that related to 436 Lisgar Avenue, which is the proposed town works yard garage and the zoning bylaw amendment. That is also coming before this council tonight. So these are very timely minutes, and hopefully you've read through them so you have the background that came from the Planning Advisory Committee. So I'm not going to ramble on about that. The committee did recommend in regard to the zoning bylaw amendment that they did recommend that to council, and with some very specific provisions. We had a delegation from Doug Miller related to that public meeting, and he was speaking on behalf of himself and the residents of Mary Street. And those provisions, Mary and Tupper Street, and those provisions are reflected in the bylaw that I said is coming before council tonight. Under new and unfinished business, just to let you know that staff are focusing, one of our focuses is on the zoning bylaw review that is required by the Planning Act. It has to be completed by January 2021. So the department is working on that and getting it ready to come to the planning committee and then on to council. The department has had several inquiries of potential developments, and that's a great thing to hear. It's with the expansion of Highway 17. There's a lot of folks out there kicking the tires and wondering what they could develop and bringing forth different things to the planning. Nothing really solid at this moment, but certainly the planning department is very busy with that and answering questions in regard to planning rules and regulations in the town of Renfrew. The encroachment agreement is a standing item that we're working on. We did have a look at the financial statements. Nothing was extraordinary there, but the planner did highlight to us that upcoming expenses related to staff development, which is required for licensing expenses, has been previously allocated within the 2020 budget, and that expenditure will be made in the next little bit. We also, whoops, I skipped a page, back to page 5, sorry. We also dealt with an encroachment agreement in regard to Finnegan's. As you know, this year we have waived the fee of encroachment, but there still has to be an agreement for specific reasons, being insurance. And when folks are putting their patios onto the municipal sidewalk, there is an encroachment agreement required, and it needs to be inspected to know that you know, people can pass safely and there is room for passage. We have been dealing with this specific application for a bit now, and at the last meeting we had left the meeting and said that we would be more than happy to reconvene at any given moment to look at that encroachment because of the season we're in, and patio season is almost at its end. Anyway, at that time, they were going to bring back some clearer drawings, and because of the location and how the frontage of the building comes out, there isn't the same area of sidewalk for people to walk as there is with Coco Jerry's because of the encroachment of the building, where the building's built, and the encroachment on the sidewalk. So we were hoping for the drawings for the construction of a walkway similar to what they had at Santa Fe. But unfortunately that did not materialize at this meeting or any meeting prior, that we were most happy to convene if we needed to do a special meeting to deal with it. The owner has decided that he's not going to run the patio and is going to so he's feeling that he doesn't need to do any of this stuff because he's going to take it down. Unfortunately, as of today, it still exists there, and there still is a little bit of a problem in regard to the railing of the patio and a sign and for people to pass. So we're working on that. The planning department is aware of that and is aware of his comments that he's decided not to have a patio, but it still continues to be. So you may hear something of that, but planning is dealing with it. So that pretty much wraps up the planning meeting that we had. And as I said, there are a few reports coming forward in regard to Lisgar Street and the portable garages that deal with this planning meeting, that came from this planning meeting. Any questions?
Vivimo.
Thank you. I think a small error in your minutes. I don't believe that Mr. Miller lives at 415 Lisgar Avenue.
No, he lives on Tupper, actually.
Yeah, that was my impression.
Yeah.
I dropped off pins to him once.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. So I'll just, I will note that, and I'll ask the planning department to correct that.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, hearing none. All in favor? Carried.
Thank you.
Okay. The planner weathers report dated September the 3rd, 2020 concerning a bylaw amendment to 436 Lisgar Avenue be received. but further that the adoption of bylaw 61/2020 is subject to the following conditions. That the proposed entrance on Mary Tupper be removed on the site plan, and all vehicular entrances be located on Lisgar Avenue, and that no future entrances on Tupper or Mary be constructed in perpetuity, which means forever. That the site plan be revised to incorporate the recommendations of the prepared land use compatibility assessment as appropriate and feasible, and that council not amend the zoning bylaw of subject property should choose to not proceed with the purchase of the property. Mover, please.
What the heck?
Councillor Hines, I'm sorry, Councillor Evans, seconded by Councillor Coolidge. Any questions or comments on this, or do we want to hear the report from Planner Withers? Vimo?
At the very minimum, just a couple of questions, so you may want, your worship, you might want to consider having the report, gone through.
Okay, we'll ask Planner Withers then to go ahead and give her the report.
Okay, thank you very much, Mayor Eadie. And so maybe just to start, I'll just refer council, if you have a digital copy of the package, it's on page 32. It's Appendix B to this report, the site plan, the draft site plan. It's sideways on the digital copy, but if you could either rotate your screen or turn your head, it's a little easier. The big idea here is that right now this draft site plan shows two entrances, one on Mary Tupper at the intersection of Mary and Tupper, and then the main truck entrance on Lisgar. And through the, we actually had a couple of public meetings. We had one statutory public meeting and then another one in September, just a follow-up where we provided an additional opportunity for public consultation. And through those two meetings and the written comments that we heard, was the main concern was that entrance at Mary and Tupper and the addition of the I believe are 16 spaces, or sorry, 18 spaces of administrative parking that would be added to that street, whereas there's currently just the residential traffic. So that was what we heard. And just in discussions internally and at committee, we determined that if the town council was prepared to eliminate that entrance and direct the designer, the architect, to reconfigure the traffic flow on that site so that the Lisgar Avenue entrance is a shared entrance with truck traffic and admin building traffic, that would seem to alleviate the concern with respect to this proposal. Notwithstanding that they did have some other reservations about having this not be residential. I think they understood that this is a good site for a transitional land use, that you have M2 zoning right beside this property, and that residential land use is probably not appropriate for it in the first place. I think they understood that and are willing to accept the proposal if that entrance at Mary and Tupper doesn't exist anymore. So that's kind of the big idea from the public consultation side of things. Now going back to the first page of my report with the motion, so it's a little bit more wordy than your standard zoning amendment. It's got a couple of conditions. Now zoning with conditions isn't, you can't have conditions in your zoning, in the zoning bylaw itself, but what I'm saying here is that if council is going to adopt this zoning bylaw tonight, that these conditions be fulfilled. And I think this is okay. So first, that the entrance be removed as discussed, that the site plan be revised to incorporate any recommendations from the prepared land use compatibility assessment. I'll discuss that in a moment here. And that three, that the council not go ahead with this if council is not prepared to purchase this property. And the reason being that this is not an application initiated by the landowner. Council is moving forward with this on a municipally initiated basis. And so, you know, I don't think it's appropriate to go ahead and rezone the property. You know, with that in mind, I think if the applicant wanted to come forward and rezone their property, but to rezone a property on a site-specific basis without the applicant's involvement is usually a pretty touchy issue. So this is proceeding on the basis and the understanding that the town is going to be purchasing the property. So I think council is pretty familiar with this property and where it is. Figure 1 on page 4 of my report is a key map. Again, sideways digitally, apologize for that. Just kind of shows the existing garage, the proposed site. They're pretty close. You'll note that, and again, council will be familiar, you've got quite a bit of residential just to the east. You've got heavy industrial to the west, and you've got kind of a mix to the south of light industrial and residential. So this is really, I think this site works as a transitional land use. I don't think it's appropriate for residential land use. Why it's zoned residential right now is a bit of a mystery. It was zoned industrial up until the last zoning bylaw review when it became residential. And I think probably inappropriately, it remains industrially designated in the official plan. So it's industrial property in terms of council's long-term vision for this site. And but it, notwithstanding that, was rezoned residential and was not appealed. So it is residentially zoned property. If anyone came forward with a subdivision application, they would still have to demonstrate it's suitable for residential use. They would have to do the same exercise the town's doing. The town went through with their land use compatibility consultant, demonstrate it's suitable for residential. So just in terms of the applicable policy, the main one is land use compatibility. You're introducing a land use with the potential for off-site emissions. You got backup alarms. You've got big trucks. You've got some open storage, probably fairly limited open storage given the town's retaining the site across the street, and you're going to still be able to use that, but still some land use compatibility potential there. The county and the town official plan speak pretty heavily to that. The county official plan and the town official plan, they say a lot of the same thing. In fact, there's a lot of the same language in the town official plan as there is in the new county official plan, and that's kind of by design. The town official plan is required to conform to the county official plan, so it makes sense that there's a lot of the same policy. So the main issues to be considered again relate to land use compatibility. The zoning, I mentioned that the zoning was industrial. I'm on page 6 of the report. It was industrial up until 2010. And it was rezoned for residential. I'll note that there was some discussion in 05-06 between the Miller Group and the town about how to go about redesignating or rezoning this property, and the town advised Miller at that time an application was required, and they didn't go ahead with it. And then in 2010, all of a sudden, it's residential. So I kind of know. I think most people know how that kind of thing works. There's a request put in kind of when the town does their zoning bylaw review. You really shouldn't be doing site-specific amendments through a zoning bylaw review unless it's glaringly obvious that it's required. The site-specific amendments really should be through an application, but in this case, I think it's pretty clear that it was kind of slid through, and now it's residentially zoned. So we're saying that the CF zone, community facilities, probably more in line with the designation of the property, which is industrial. Department and agency comments. So we didn't really have much in the way of internal comments. We had the director of Parks, Recreation, Facilities that in his opinion, he thought that there might be some other land that might be suitable elsewhere. I just note there in response to my report that we're not just kind of coming out of nowhere with this. Council did direct staff to compare the site to, or the Development and Works Committee did direct staff to compare the site to the existing Development and Works property, and this site was determined to be a more appropriate site long-term for the needs of the town. And that's attached as Appendix C. So that's the basis of this. And council has entered into an agreement, purchase and sale with Miller Group for this property, and this is a condition. So that's the basis for it, and certainly appreciate the director's participation in the process.
Any questions? Any questions or comments on this? Revimo.
Thank you. Thank you. So recommendations, I'm wondering about something, you know, when I'm taking into consideration your comments about adding points to, you know, the 1, 2, 3, you know, in terms of you're not entirely comfortable with that. So, but I you know, in terms of reassuring the folks on Mary and Tupper, you know, I was wondering about a point 4, which describes it in some detail, or at the very minimum, at least a commitment to some kind of barrier along there, because I see in Appendix B, there's a tree line. It looks like it's, you know, the tree line and the green space is approximately 20 meters, maybe 15 meters, just based on scale. So I'm just wondering, is that something we should be adding in as a point 4, so that they're not looking at a chain link fence with a bunch of cars with headlights pointed out that way, even if you change it around. So I'm just wondering, should we be adding that kind of a feature to number 4, to a possible number 4?
Withers.
Yeah, thank you. And through you, Mary, the town did have a consultant. We did retain Pinch Environmental Consultants to prepare a land use compatibility assessment in accordance with D6, Ministry of the Environment D6 guidelines. It's the same thing that Lapine had to do for their development, and it works the other way around too when you're introducing a potentially noxious land use. By noxious, it's anything related to dust, noise, not necessarily poisonous. So just so that's clear. Okay, so they did recommend a number of mitigation measures on page 8 of my report, and that is captured within the recommended condition number 2. So, and there are a number on page 8 of the report. There is the reference to utilizing a buffer within the within the portion between the proposed development and the adjacent dwellings, and trying to to use some sort of a visual buffer in that regard. But we can certainly include some reference to making sure that there is a vegetative buffer planted there with an additional condition, if it pleases council.
Any other questions or comments?
Sorry not to belabor it, but just so I'm clear. So this buffer, it looks like, I did read that, thank you. And I'm not being sarcastic, I did read it. I just, my impression was it would be flat as opposed to up 4 feet, you know, in grass. So that's kind of what I was trying to get to, was what would that buffer look like? And I wasn't sure if the buffer was adequate. So that, and again, that's all I'm asking.
Hey, Councillor Hines.
I'm as the chair of planning, I'm quite happy with adding that in there, although it somewhat addresses it in the content of the report. But as a condition, I think that would be just fine to be added in there, because that is certainly what the residents are hoping for there. So that's a good point, Revimo.
I agree. I think that makes it, takes away any gray area there might be. I'd like to see that incorporated as well.
I'm sorry, Your Worship, one final question. Is this, would this be, and I guess to Clerk Bulmer and possibly Planner Withers, so this, the minutes of this report, would they be attached somehow to the land title? So because it's, it says if we don't go forward, but that only lasts, in council's recent memory, because bylaws can be changed or amended if the town decides to go in a different direction in 8 years because we can't afford it, or decide to do something different, or partner with, the county and build something halfway to Burnstown, who knows? And then all of a sudden that land's there and somebody decides to sell it. So I'm just a little concerned about the mechanism to offer the, so the town keeps its word.
Clerk Bulmer?
Yeah, it's kind of all a bit clumsy putting these conditions to a zoning bylaw amendment. Council has, or through council, we have an agreement of purchase and sale with a conditional period that now has been adjusted to the end of September, and that will fit in nicely with the 20-day appeal period, subject to passage tonight of the zoning bylaw amendment. And after that point, we'll have 30 days council to execute a final bylaw. So council will be asked to actually make that final, I guess, decision making point on purchasing the property by the end of October. And in conformance with number 3, that will set in place, whether that property remains zoned as approved or not approved tonight. I think if for whatever reason council decides not to purchase, then we'd probably go through a process of reversing that decision and taking that bylaw back off the books with council decision. So, and again, as Planner Withers has explained, a lot of those recommendations out of the D6 will be, and through the number 2 will be discussed and entertained during the site plan phase of development, should it proceed that far. So.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, all in favor? Carried. Okay. Okay, the bylaw 61/2020 being a bylaw to amend bylaw 46/2010, being a bylaw to regulate the use of lands and the character, location, use of buildings and structures within the town of Renfrew pursuant to section 34 of the Planning Act with respect to property known municipally as 436 Elizabeth Avenue, town of Renfrew, county of Renfrew, roll number 4748-000-070-17600, be read a first time and deemed to have been read a second time. Over, please. Councillor Hines, second by Councillor Evans. Again, any questions or concerns? Hearing none. All in favor? Carried. The bylaw 61-2020 being a bylaw to amend bylaw number 46-2010, being a bylaw to regulate the use of lands and the character, location, and use of buildings and structures within the town of Renfrew pursuant to section 34 of the Planning Act with respect to the property known municipally as 436 Lisgar Avenue, town of Renfrew, county of Renfrew, having roll number 4748-000-070-17600, be read a third time and be passed. Over, please. Councillor Hines, second by Councillor Coolidge. Any questions or comments? Hearing none. All in favor? Carried. Okay, the Planner Withers report dated September the 3rd, 2020, concerning a bylaw amendment to regulate portable garages be received. A mover, please. Councillor Evans, a second by Revimo. Okay, we'll turn it over to Planner Withers for his report.
Okay, thank you again, Mayor Eady. This one here is a municipally initiated, again, a municipally initiated zoning bylaw amendment. And it stems from a committee initiative that relates to portable garages and kind of looking at when they're appropriate, where they're appropriate, and what condition they should be in when they exist on private property. So just for council's information, right now, portable garages are treated as accessory buildings. And they don't have any additional regulations beyond that. They are permitted to exist year round. They are permitted anywhere an accessory building is normally permitted, which is really anywhere, provided setbacks are complied with. And so that's the existing framework for portable garages. The planning committee kind of noted that there were some examples of portable garages in town where they might not have been in the best repair, and as a result weren't really good for the aesthetic of the community. So I was given some direction last year to look into some examples of other bylaws and how other municipalities treat portable garages. And there's quite the gamut, as you'd imagine. Because the county has done the lion's share of the zoning bylaws for lower tiers in the county, they follow very much the same approach, being that there's very little regulation on portable garages. They're basically treated as an accessory building. Some municipalities, and there's kind of a review there in Appendix B of the report. There's one of the earlier reports from last year. So Arnprior and Pembroke kind of treated a little bit differently. They're more urban municipalities. Greater Madawaska, I believe, has some additional regulations. They're prohibited in all zones except the rural zone. McNabb Brayside's fairly similar as well. They're prohibited in all zones except agricultural and rural zones. So I mean, that being said, those municipalities, the majority of the properties in those municipalities are going to be zoned rural or agricultural anyway. So there really is very little restriction. So, given that we're an urban municipality, Pembroke and Arnprior do have some additional requirements. We have smaller lots. There's a greater potential for portable garages to get out of hand on smaller lots in more urban areas. So I certainly do understand the basis for this. So the draft bylaw is attached as Appendix A to this report. It's the draft bylaw 62-2020. So it has some additional requirements that would be imposed through this bylaw. So it's permitted in a rear yard, just the same way it is now. So as long as you have it, meets setbacks and everything, you can have it as long as you want, and there's no regulation on the number. You have as many as you want as long as you're meeting coverage limits and whatnot. In the side yard and front yard, this is where the new restrictions come into place. They're only permitted on a parking area or driveway, and they're only permitted from October to May annually. So they're only permitted during the winter months. So this is with kind of the appreciation that the portable garages, they're by and large, they are marketed as a shelter for vehicles during the winter months. So that's what the rationale is for the time restriction, and that is the exact time restriction that the city of Pembroke has in their zoning bylaw. There's a restriction on one portable garage being permitted, a maximum of one portable garage in the front and side yard in residential zones, and again, no limit in the rear yard. And then there's D, there's a reference to them being maintained in good repair. That's a current requirement through the property standards bylaw, but it's just reinforced through the zoning bylaw. So that's the draft bylaw. Those are the additional restrictions that would be placed on it. There was some discussion had at committee about legal non-conforming status and how it relates to portable garages. I suggested that in my view, a portable garage is a structure. It meets the definition of a structure under the zoning bylaw. I believe that it does benefit from legal non-conforming status under section 34(9) of the Planning Act, meaning that if it is in existence as of the date of passing of a bylaw that prohibits that use or structure, that it can continue to exist as long as it exists continuously. And I noted that, in my opinion, because portable garages they're not the most durable in terms of how long they last, that they would survive replacement. So if someone was to go and replace their portable garage, even though you're taking it down, I've had legal advice in the past that it does survive, legal non-conforming status does survive demolition. So as long as the intent is to immediately erect the building or structure as it was. So I think those are my comments. We did have a member of the public express some concern about the additional requirements, being that some people do use them year round for the storage of equipment and other things that would otherwise be stored in their yard, which I can certainly appreciate. But I think the committee at the end of the day recognized that, or determined that these, are more appropriate used on a seasonal basis where they are visible, being in the front and side yards, and that if they're in the rear yard, they can be used that way. So I think that basically summarizes it. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, any questions or comments? Review.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Withers, curious, I didn't see any reference to a license or an inventory, and I'm not talking about a license in terms of a fee, but just that we're aware that they're being erected from October 15th to May 15th. That we have to, it's easier to enforce if you know where to look as opposed to hiring a drone and looking at everybody's backyard. So I'm just curious about how that was omitted, or why it was omitted, or was it omitted?
As in, thank you, and through you, Mary, to Revimo. So that was discussed at committee. At the end of the day, the committee decided that it wasn't something they wanted to recommend to council. I think what their thinking was that like the zoning bylaw is today, it's enforced on a complaints basis. If anyone sees a garage that wasn't there before and it is there outside of the permitted time periods, that we're going to rely on the residents to bring that forward to the town, and we can certainly enforce the bylaw at that time.
Thank you.
Councillor Hines.
I just wanted to say that when the committee spoke to this, not that we've had any specific written complaints, but certainly people have, brought some of the to our attention some of the garages that maybe aren't in the best of shape, and we want certainly to allow people to have an affordable place for their vehicles to be protected in the winter from loads of snow on it. But as you can see in this report, the building official does say that they are not snow load sanctioned, and they are portable garages, and they are temporary structures. So that's where we went with making all of these decisions, and allowing people to have them in their backyard, certainly to store their 8 ATVs in the winter in them, or their lawnmowers or whatever they have to store, but nothing on the front lawn, only in the driveway for that specific amount of time. So we're kind of putting out the fires before they got started.
Any other questions or comments? We just had one planner where there's one description that they continue to be permitted in the rear yard with no limitations on time of year or location on a driveway. Required setbacks must be met. Now, as I understood it at our meeting, a backyard only consisted of the width of the house. And I'm reading this, and I thought that a backyard to me would start at the back of the house, and as long as they met all the required setbacks, I would have been fine with it. But the way at the planning meeting, it seemed to me that we weren't talking about setbacks as a backyard. Now, if this reads, and I read it right here, as long as they meet the required setbacks, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, thank you. And through you, Mary, maybe I'll just quickly share an illustration with council just to assist with this. Hopefully that didn't gum everyone's displays up, but at any rate. So this is showing kind of where the different yards are. So if you'll just look at this property right here, this is a regular lot, and this is a conventional interpretation of what the rear yard is and what the front yard is. Okay, so the front yard is so this is the street at the bottom. Okay, the front yard is the space between the front lot line and the closest part of the building. Okay, whether it's a garage or whatever it is. Okay, that space in there is the front yard. The rear yard is the space between the rear lot line, which is the furthest lot line from the front lot line, and the closest part of the building. That's the rear yard. Okay, and it's a horizontal plane along the rear of the building, parallel to the rear lot line. The side yard is what's left over. Okay, so the side yard doesn't extend along. I believe what you're saying is that the rear yard is only the width of the building. It's actually the full width of the lot, starting at the closest part of the building to the rear lot line. And so this is the side yard. So in terms of the bylaw, the bylaw says that in the front yard and these 2 yards here, the side yards, that's where the time limitation and the location on driveway requirement comes into play. The rear yard is where there's no time limit. There's no number of garages. It doesn't have to be on a driveway. Does that help?
Yes, and I think that clears it out for me. So the rear yard, as long as they meet all the setbacks on the rear yard as per our bylaw, they're like, in other words, 5 feet from the neighbor's fence line, etc.
Yeah.
That could be a goal then. Okay.
Yeah, that's correct.
That now. Thank you. Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, all in favor? Opposed? Councillor Koulis, were you in favor or opposed? I can't. In favor. He's in favor. Okay, it was carried. Thank you. Okay. The bylaw 62-2020 being a bylaw to amend bylaw 46-2010, being a bylaw to regulate the use of lands and character, location, and use of buildings and structure within the town of Brentford pursuant of section 34 of the Planning Act with respect to portable garages. You read it first time and deemed to have been read a second time. Mover, please. Councillor Koulis, second by Councillor Hines. Again, any questions or comments? Rebimo.
I'm assuming that the sketch that we were just showing is attached to the bylaw to assist people with interpretation.
Just through you, Mayor Eady, it's an illustration that's contained within the zoning bylaw.
Perfect.
So it's
Thank you.
on page 42 of the zoning bylaw.
Thank you.
Councillor Hines.
Your worship, I do think that would be a good idea to attach that sketch or that reference to what is the side yard and what is the front yard. I know that we had a lot of confusion and discussion at the committee meeting, and it's just hard to kind of understand that terminology, but the sketch certainly determines that very well. So anybody looking at that would be able to sort that out.
So a
Yeah.
picture's worth 1,000 words.
Mm-hmm. If you don't mind,
That won't be a problem, Planner Withers.
Planner,
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor? Carried. Thank you. Okay. The Planner Withers report dated September the 3rd, 2020 concerning backyard chickens be received. A further Renfrew Town Council resolved to not proceed with amending and passing the required bylaws to permit backyard chickens. And further that the existing regulatory framework be maintained. And further that the keeping of livestock only be permitted in association with farm use. Mover, please. Councillor Hines, second by Councillor Jamison. Again, I'll turn it over to Planner Withers for his report.
Just before you do, my apologies. Did I miss the third reading of bylaw 62, 2020?
I read it.
You read it? Okay.
I think it was moved by Councillor Cooless and
Yep.
seconded by Councillor
Yeah.
Hines, I think.
Yeah, well, I had that on the first and second, but I'll go back through the note or through the recording and determine that. Thank you.
do you want us to do it again?
No,
Okay, got the chickens here. Do we have a mover here, Councillor Hines and
Yeah, Jameson.
Councillor Jamison? Okay. I'll turn it over to you for your report.
Okay, thank you, Mary D again. And so actually, you know, this was an educational exercise for me. I haven't had to deal with backyard chickens yet in my practice, so it's quite interesting, and I understand it is kind of a topic of the day, if you will, making the rounds on social media and whatnot. I know a number of municipalities, Deep River has been looking at it. Whitewater just put a bylaw through. So it is it's something that a lot of people, I think, started thinking of when the pandemic started, and people saw the eggs are looking different, and now they're packaged differently, and now this isn't going to look good, and I need to have some control over my eggs and chickens. So you know, and I get it. I think everyone was a bit kind of maybe disturbed by how things were changing so quickly, and how could this happen? And so at any rate, we did have someone bring the matter before Planning Advisory Committee, a member of the public, and they did ask through actually one of the committee members that the committee investigate this and do some research. And so we did do that. We did do a research report, and this is effectively before you here. The resident did provide a delegation to council, providing their rationale for why they thought backyard chickens, you know, were the virtues, benefits of them. And they, you know what, I'll definitely give it to them. There are definitely some benefits. I don't think that's, you know, you can dismiss that there is definitely some value to locally produced food. You know, there's a sense of greater control over food sources. I'm kind of looking at page 2 of my report here. There's a list of benefits. A lot of people think the eggs taste better. You know, there's the education component, and with the kids at home, I think a lot of people are looking to grow things, and, some chickens, maybe, kind of neat. I do know friends that kind of live, in a more rural area that have them, and the kids love them. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But and pest control, I guess they do eat bugs. So, with that said, we did have some experts come to our last, two planning advisory committee meetings ago. We did have Al Dam, as Councillor Hines mentioned, we did have Al Dam from OMAFRA come and provide us with a delegation, and we did have Mr. McBain come. And they did, they preached caution with this. I think Mr. Dam has enough experience with small flock operations and with municipalities that are looking at this. And he said it's like unbelievable. He referred to them as pandemic pets, and that the number of municipalities that are now looking at this or being asked to look at this is really just astronomical. And he looks at it, and he does understand the reasons why people want to raise chickens, but he does, there are a number of things you got to keep in mind. So any farmer will tell you, if you have livestock, you have dead stock. Okay, you got to have somewhere to put those birds when they die, and they're not necessarily dying because you want them to die to eat them. They're dying of different things. They're dying of disease. In some cases, they're dying of the cold. Unfortunately, it's just the reality. And so, a farmer will dig a 3-foot hole and throw the bird in, and that'll be the end of it. But and there are renderers, there are people who do it for a living, but they're unlikely to come into town for 1 or 2 birds, right? And they're going to charge a lot of money. Manure, you got to have a place for that. And with dead stock, our landfill doesn't permit it. Manure, we'd have to look at that as well in terms of impacts to our landfill. Noise, roosters obviously shouldn't be allowed under any circumstances. Guinea fowl are also just a breed that's really noisy. Disease, making sure you have vaccinations, that kind of thing. Animal welfare. The winter does come, and unfortunately, if the coop is not well insulated and heated, you do have animal welfare issues. They will lose their combs, they will lose feet. Just is not a good situation. And then safety of structures required for keeping chickens, making sure you have all your permits in place and whatnot. So there are just a number of things you have to think about. You can't just go all of a sudden go and buy yourself a barnyard mix from M&R Feeds and away you go. There's a lot to think about. Different controls, lot size, number of hens, the breed of hen, egg production, and meat production. Meat production is not recommended because of the turnaround. You're looking at in some cases like 6 weeks, for a turnaround for a meat bird. Personal consumption only, no sale. Again, no roosters, maximum, minimum coop size, controls over food supply, waste, disposal, and slaughter, minimum setbacks to property lines, other dwellings, abutting properties, schools, churches, and businesses, and then education. So Al Dam, the gentleman from the ministry, really said, if you're going to let people keep birds in an urban area, education is key. People need to know how to keep them. This isn't just, again, you're not just going and buying a bunch of birds and then putting them in the shed out back. You need to know how to keep them and take care of them. And you got to look at things like financial resources and impacts to the municipality. You're going to have likely an application licensing process. You're probably going to have to be doing inspections. Kingston sees about 100 applications a year. Okay, so they do have an urban poultry program. They see about 100 applications a year. So you need to run that. We're probably not going to see that in Renfrew if we put one in place, but at any rate, there will be considerations there. So we did, just in terms of consultation, again, we did have the member of the public. We did have the 2 delegations. Mr. McBain did emphasize that he does have clients that have backyard chickens permitted. they're largely agricultural based communities, not urban communities. I do have some sample bylaws attached as Appendix B. As Councillor Hines did note, and Niagara Falls does permit, they're probably one of the probably one of the longer standing urban municipalities that does permit backyard chickens. It seems to work for them. But more recent municipalities, you have Whitewater Region. They do have just quite a long list of provisions or requirements for backyard chickens and what they have, the regulations and the rules that owners have to follow. And they do have a licensing program in place. Attached as Appendix A, there's just an inventory, there's a table of different municipalities and how they deal with them. Again, I think you can draw a line through urban versus rural municipalities. There are some urban municipalities that do have backyard chickens. Again, Kingston, Niagara Falls, Brampton permits it. But by and large, the other municipalities, you have a 1 acre lot size requirement, and they are largely agricultural in nature. So I think I'll maybe just leave it at that. If there's any other questions, I'll be glad to answer them. And the recommendation of the committee is not to move forward with this. I certainly can support that recommendation. I think with the considerations and with the with Renfrew being a relatively small municipality geographically and having a relatively small lot size, I think in order to implement something like this, you'd have to really kind of go full bore and really have a solid licensing program in place. You're going to have financial considerations for that. So I'll kind of leave it to council to determine how they'd like to move forward. Thank you.
Okay, any questions or comments on this? Vivimo.
Yes, thank you. That's a pretty comprehensive report and certainly a lot of research. It encapsulated to me the issues and the challenges. So thank you for that, and thank you to the committee. That you have to think forward sometimes when you're reviewing a policy or proposing a policy change, and I think they've done that. So thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. At the very start, I thought there might be a possibility of this, but having listened to the experts, there's so many problems with it and so many scenarios that could happen, and the cost of the eggs would be astronomical, according to the report we were given. So I definitely voted against it. So in this case, all in favor? Thank you. Okay, that the minutes of the Finance Committee meeting held August 24th, 2020 be received. Over, please. Councillor Hines, seconded by Vivimo. Okay.
If I could interject one more time, and I apologize. I just listened back to the stream quickly, and we did indeed miss the third reading of bylaw 62, 2020.
Sorry, my fault.
So we need a mover and a seconder if you want to read the third reading.
Okay, this is number 10 on the list. That bylaw 2020 being a bylaw to amend bylaw 46, 2010, being a bylaw to regulate the use of lands and character, location, use of buildings and structures within the town of Brentford pursuant to section 34 of the Planning Act with respect to portable garages be read a third time and be passed. Mover, please. Councillor Hines, second by Vivimo. Again, any questions or comments? All in favor? Carried. Okay. Sorry about that.
Right.
Okay, in the finance meeting, there's a couple highlights. If you look on page 2, under phase 1, we're going to receive $242,400 from the provincial government for funding to help with our shortfalls, etc. There is a part 2 to it, but we will have to fill out an application, and if we meet the criteria, we'll get more money, and if not, we won't. Also, there's a letter from that was from Minister Clark. And the next letter from Minister of Transportation, Honorable Carolyn Mulrooney, that phase 1 funding to provide immediate relief from the financial pressures of COVID phase 2 funding be available to address the ongoing financial pressures until the end of 2021. And that's to allude to transit. And again, that would affect the Sunshine Coach in Renfrew. And again, they would be the same way. They'll get a certain amount of money, a half, and they'd have to prove that they need the other half to move forward. We talked about the electric entrance signage. Under new business, the Finance Committee recommended the council approve a 20-year debenture to finance the Highway 60 Church Street project shortfall. Okay, and the capital budget complete with supporting business cases. We initiated that to be brought to us by for 2021, to be submitted by September 30th. In other words, anything to do with capital budget is to be into the treasurer by September the 30th of this year. And that's about it, I guess. Nothing else? Okay. Any questions or comments? Okay. Hearing none. All in favor? Carried. Okay. Number 11. The Planner Weathers report dated September 3rd, 2020 concerning backyard chickens be received. A further Renfrew Town Council resolved to not proceed with amending and passing required bylaw to permit backyard chickens. That further that the existing regulatory framework be maintained. Further that the keeping of livestock only be permitted in association with farm use. Mover, please. Councillor Hines, second by Councillor Jamison. Okay, any further comments on this? All in favor? Okay. Carried. Okay, that the minutes of the Human Resources Committee meeting held August 13th, 2020 be received. Over, please. Reeve Emo, second by Councillor Jamison. Turn over to Reeve Emo for his report.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. We held our meeting on August the 13th. It was electronically, of course, and I'll move you through to number 7, overtime during COVID. There was some discussion about it, and we invited Chief Welch in to join us as well, and he explained some of the restrictions this placed on him and his ability to staff accordingly. And it was tied to the provisions in the collective agreement with the Firefighters Association. And so with that, there was a motion came forward and subsequently was dealt with at council. And again, Director Hill in item B on the same page, which is page 2, talked to us about the ice season staffing, and you can see the background. And there was a direction. We supported his position with respect to hiring of term employees, subject to he and the treasurer meeting with the representatives of QP Local 121 in advance of filling the positions. We didn't want to spark a grievance or a debate with the local. Wanted to try and work this out ahead of time. And that the committee supported the hiring of part-time staff rather than term employees. The language is important, and if necessary, to ensure adequate staffing for the entire 2021 ice season. So that was the conversations that we had. Then you move to item number C, which was page 3. And customer service representation. 2 of the 3 are on maternity leave, and so we wanted to hire 2 temporary customer service representatives. And again, that was deemed to be temporary positions, and we made that recommendation. We had a closed session to discuss some information that was brought to us by the Township of Greater Madawaska, and I believe that is moving with some other similar requests to senior managers for a discussion and a recommendation back to committee and to council. Thank you.
Questions or comments? Councillor Hines.
Through your worship, to Reeve Emon, in regard to the jobs in recreation, are we, I know that we had some casual people last year doing snow removal, etc. And are we looking to bring those people back, or are we posting those jobs, or what is the status in regard to the term positions? I'm quite fine with the committee's decision, but I'm just trying to understand who we're talking about there.
We did have 4 employees who were in, 4 part-time employees who were in. They were members who had been with us and left our employ, but we brought them back under a temporary designation. And so we're looking to fill those positions again. And we have some understanding of our needs, but at the same time recognizing that the physical structure of the Mattaway Activity Center and its operations are going to be in flux for a little while until we sort some things out. We didn't want to get bogged down with some positions and then have to downsize down the road or change too many job descriptions.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, all in favor? Carried. The Brantford Town Council approved the hiring of 2 temporary customer service representatives, CSR, until the incumbent CSR staff members return to work or resign. Over, please. Councillor Hines, second by Reeve Emo. Any questions or comments on this? Okay. Hearing none, all in favor? Carried. Okay, the Treasurer Riley's report dated September 2nd, 2020, concerning the financing of Stewart Street Highway 60 be received. Further, Renfrew Town Council approved the financing of the Stewart Street Highway 60 project as outlined in Schedule A to this report. Further, that the unfinanced cost of $869,068 be financed by means of a 20-year debenture upon completion of the project. Mover, please. Councillor Evans, second by Councillor Hines. Again, any reason we'd have Treasurer Riley give this report, or we're fine with it? Councillor Jamison, I think you're on mute. Okay, everybody fine with it? Any questions? Okay. All in favor? Carried. The Treasurer Riley's report dated September 2nd, 2020, concerning the financing of County Road 52, Raglan Street South, and Earth Boulevard projects be received. Further, Renfrew Town Council approved the financing for the County Road 52, Raglan Street South project as outlined in Schedule A to this report. Further, Renfrew Town Council approved the financing of Earth Boulevard project as outlined in Schedule B to this report from 2021 shave and pave application. Mover, please. Councillor Evans, second by Councillor Hines. Again, maybe in this case we will ask the Treasurer O'Reilly to give the report.
Thank you, Mayor Eadie. Using the same reasoning as was done with the Stewart Street report, it's important for not just myself as treasurer, but for council to keep a record of what is being approved as far as the limited capital resources we have. When you start dealing with multi-year projects like Stewart Street and County Road 52, and we propose to use certain funding, sometimes it gets lost in year 2 as to what was proposed. So this will formalize it by way of a resolution that the financing that's being proposed for County Road 52, which was outlined in the report that went to council when the contract was awarded, as well as the financing for the Ayers Boulevard project, which had no proposed financing at that time, that this be accepted by council this evening so that there is little question. For example, on County Road 52, part of the proposed funding is the use of the 2019 OCIF funding, which we received a year ago, but didn't assign to any project yet. And then we also get money from the County of Renfrew. At the same time, our council is committing funding from both the water and wastewater operating funds, which will have to be incorporated into the 2021 and 2022 budgets. On Ayers Boulevard, the commitment is to use shave and pave funds from the 2021 allocation so that, again, the project doesn't sit there with no approved funding and then have to try to scramble to get it at a later date. This will spell out the two projects and where the money will come from to finance each of them.
Okay, any questions? Okay, all in favor? Carried, thank you. Okay, the Director Hills report dated September 2nd, 2020 concerning digital entrance signage be received. Further, Renfrew Town Council authorized staff to purchase digital entrance signage from Pattison Sign Group for installation at the Visitors Information Center on Lisgar Street, or Lisgar Avenue, Bruce Street, and Sturt Street entrances to the town at a total cost of $279,443.14, inclusive of non-refundable HST. Further, Renfrew Town Council authorized staff to coordinate the installation of the concrete bases and electrical supply using local contractors at an estimated total cost of $55,698, inclusive of non-refundable HST. Further, that Renfrew Town Council waived the sign permit fee for the installation of the four entrance signs. Further, that the cost of the signs be financed from the modernization funding. Over, please. Reeve Emo, second by Councillor Hines. Okay, any questions or comments? Well, I guess we should ask for a report from Director Hill. You wouldn't mind?
Absolutely. As stated in the report, the entrance signs have been a topic of discussion for a number of years at a number of various committees. Started, I guess, with recreation, then went to economic development, and then was forwarded to finance for direction. I've been working with the Pattison Sign Group for a number of years on various designs. I believe the version that is presented to you tonight for your consideration is the 12th version. Staff have reviewed and updated those designs based on the location that have been selected, and that is to replace the existing entrance signs currently located on the streets identified in the recommendation. We do have to relocate a couple of signs because of the power requirements that would be required to install the entrance signs at those locations. So there will be slight modifications to the location should the report and the recommendation be approved as presented. I have been working with local utilities, Renfrew Hydro, to ensure that the hydro is available. I've also been dealing with the Pattison Sign Group on what requirements would be needed to operate the signs remotely, both programming the signs and adjusting the content on them on a minute-by-minute basis should we so wish. The report is presented with the direction to go with 4 entrance signs. Staff would take care of the seeking quotes to place the bases in, and then the signs would be supplied and installed and training provided by the Pattison Sign Group. And you know, there was options. We did present options of going with 2 signs. Then the direction of the Finance Committee was to present the report based on all 4 signs going in at the same time. And if there's any questions about the report, I'd be more than happy to attempt to answer those.
Okay, any questions or comments? Councillor Hines.
Your worship, just a comment. These signs have been on the drawing board for some time, and we did receive that modernization funding that is specifically designated for various projects, and this being one of them that fit the criteria. And we have received that money some time ago, and the treasurer did advise us that certainly the provincial government is looking for some explanation about what we're using that money for and not just storing it. So to me, this is a great project to move forward with. And when we do receive some funding through the modernization funding to accommodate this kind of expenditure, that I think will enhance certainly what's happening in the town. And it would be great if we had it right now with COVID in place. But having said that, I'm very much in favor of moving forward with this. And I appreciate all the work that Director Hill has done to put this report together. We sent him away a couple of times to get information from other municipalities and just see how it worked with other municipalities. And the report is very complete and to the point of knowing what we're going to get. So I appreciate that from you, Director Hill.
Revimo.
Thank you. I too, I'm going to express my support for this. I agree with Councillor Hines. With COVID and the onset of COVID, it would have been nice to have these to help with the messaging because those were very uncertain times. As you know, we went from masks aren't good to masks are beneficial. We went from we weren't sure how it was spreading to droplets. So I think part of part of our responsibility is to educate our public. Also, I think when we get back to some semblance of normalcy, they'll also serve to drive messages about events. We're going to need to recover our economy, and that means our events. People are going to be looking for things to do. And again, we talk about informing our public. Newspapers and our newspaper corner is only one aspect of informing our public. Radio ads are effective as well. They're only one aspect. Our newsletter that goes out is one aspect. We've branched out into social media, and so that's been another effective venue. You can't just concentrate your efforts on one or two vehicles. You have to use a whole raft of them. I note that we are very proud of establishing the Wi-Fi throughout the downtown through the RED grant, and to me, this is just part of our ongoing efforts to electronically engage and to get out information. Information is key right now to everybody on any number of topics. If we want community engagement, we have to inform people and invite it. And one of the ways of doing it is through this. I note that the modernization money, there's still some available. I think this is a very useful way of using it. It's an appropriate way. I think the province would be appreciative of that. And I would suggest to you that Clerk Ballmer is coming back to us with something on live streaming and electronic meetings in the future very soon. And again, I think this would go hand in glove with the electronic board campaign. And I know it's a pricey item. Thankfully, we don't have to fund them over 10 years or 20 years, one every 4 years. We can do them all at once and get some savings from it and then have an instant impact. So I'm very much in favor of this. And again, thank you to Director Hill and to Treasurer O'Reilly for making the numbers work, big numbers. And thank you to the province of Ontario for their foresight in giving us money to allow us to engage our community and inform it.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, hearing none. I opposed this at our meeting, and I'm still opposed to it. I just think that spending $330,000 and then with an administration fee, hydro cost after that is an awful lot of money to spend on that type of project. I understand there's definitely some benefits to it, no question. My main concern is moving ahead with it right now is that we have no idea what if we're going to get into the OSIF funds next year. We haven't been okayed on that. The Ontario Municipal Fund, we have no idea what that may be next year. And I just feel that I just don't want to spend money. I don't feel it's right to spend money when we have so many unknowns coming down the road. I would feel a lot more comfortable if I knew them two numbers were coming in. And if the OSIF was coming for another 5 years or something, I'd be happy with that. But at the present time, I'm going to have to respectfully oppose this. Vivimo.
Sorry, Your Worship. It's probably my fault for not getting this information out. The minister did announce at AMO that the OMPF funding was stable for next year. So the funding we receive will remain in place for next year. I think we may be getting some kind of a notification in the mail, but it was announced. I'll check and forward the announcement to council, or at least the press release from the minister.
Thank you. Councillor Evans. You're on mute, Councillor Evans.
My apologies. Thank you. Your Worship, I was under the impression that the modernization fund was sufficient to cover this purchase.
It is.
So if that is the case, would we not be paid for signs throughout the town? Or is this coming out of capital at the town doesn't have yet?
Money is there to pay for it, yes.
Okay.
Any other questions or comment? Councillor Hines.
Just one more comment that, yes, the money is from the modernization fund, and we have had that money for a little bit. And it does have some very specific criteria about what you can use that modernization funding for. So it's not like we can just use it to pay for a street or anything like that. We'd have to be, I think, pretty creative to do that. So I see this as something that we've looked at over and over, at least as long as I've been on council, and I understand it came forward before that. So I would not go against you, Mayor Eadie, but I do see it as something that is progressive at this time, and we do have the funding, and we do need to use that funding before they ask us again what we're doing with it.
Any other questions or comments? Councillor Koulis. You're on mute, Councillor Koulis.
I'd just like to say that I am too in favor of using this money to promote our town in this way. I think it's money well spent, and it's money that was earmarked for this type of expense.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none. I'd asked Clerk Bulmer if you could have a recorded vote on this, please.
Okay, so we have a recorded vote on the motion, which was read. I won't read it back, but essentially to authorize the purchase of digital entrance signage and the coordination of the installation of such signage, waiving of permit fees associated, and that the cost be financed from the modernization funding. Request for recorded vote on that. Reeve Emon.
I'm in favor. Thank you.
Councillor Koulis.
I'm in favor.
Councillor Evans.
In favor.
Councillor Hines.
In favor.
Councillor Jemison.
In favor.
Mayor Eadie.
I'm opposed. Thank you.
Motion is carried.
Okay. Next, that Dr. Hill's report date September 2nd, 2020 concerning the McDougall Mill Museum roof replacement be received. I've heard the Renfrew Town Council authorized staff to award the McDougall Mill Museum roof replacement to Yokowski Roofing in the amount of $44,441.24, inclusive of non-refundable HST. Mover, please. Councillor Hines, second by Reeve Emo. Any questions or comments on this? Okay. Hearing none, I do know that Director Hill worked very hard in getting a number of different quotes on this and whatever, and I think he's come up with, I believe it's a steel shingle, if I'm not mistaken. Director Hill?
We actually, in review, we have went and recommended to council with the heritage steel, the panel look, because upon review of the original roof structure on the McDougall Mill Museum, it was appearance that it was a sheet steel. We actually could, for I believe the number is about $2,000 cheaper, we could have went with the steel shingle, but upon review of the original drawings or original photos, I'm sorry, we are recommended the sheet steel, but totally up to council if they wish to go with the shingle. It does not change the contractor. The price would be slightly less, but based on our review of the drawing or the original photos, the resemblance is more accurate with the heritage steel.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Revimo.
Thank you. A little curious, I wouldn't say alarmed, with the difference between the actual cost and what the company that reviewed the asset and said it was going to cost for replacement. The difference of $80,000, that's a margin of one thumb that I can't quite get my head around. So I'd be awfully curious if there's some long-term analysis to let us know why that happened.
I think that was because they were quoting wood shingles at that time.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, all in favor? Carried. Okay, that's it. Minutes of the Development Works Committee meeting held August 11, 2020 be received. Over, please. Councillor Coolidge, seconded by Councillor Evans. Turn over to Councillor Coolidge for his report.
One of the last reports of the evening, and obviously the best one of them all. You can see by looking at the minutes of that meeting that it's a very active department within the town of Renfrew. We did hear our building report from our building official, Tom Webster, and those numbers are available, of course, to council, and all the numbers are proceeding upwards now that we are getting past the initial downswing of construction in the town of Renfrew. Building permits are up considerably, and of course, because of the increased fees, there's more in the coffers as a result. Various items we discussed under new business have been already to council, such as Stewart Street, Empire Ross, County Road 52. We have discussed and talked these projects almost to death, in the sense that they are either approved or they are already completed. In the case of Empire Ross, Earth is about to go ahead next spring. Stewart Street is already in progress. County Road 52, of course, we talked about. McAndrew is nearing completion. We did discuss that at length again today at our Development of Works meeting. And by the way, that will be a great report when you get that next meeting. Water tower, again, we've already presented that at the last council meeting for its repairs and repainting and so on. And there's patching, of course, throughout the town that is ongoing, and a lot of that will be done, I'm told by the director, on the third week of this month. So 2 weeks from now, that will be concentrated throughout town. There are some streets in town that were cut and repairs were done, and the gravel is still existing, like Renfrew Avenue West and Boncher Street in front of the Collegiate. They will be done in 2 weeks' time. And we also, of course, discussed the town garage, which we dealt with earlier this evening. So that's it in a nutshell, unless you have any questions.
Any questions, council? Revimo.
A quick question, and it's sort of directed to Clerk Ballmer as well. Stewart Street, when we approved it at the special meeting, there was some conversation about some of the items being not totally necessary for the success of the project, and I'm curious, have we captured that in a motion at some point? Firstly, and then secondly, is that something that the committee would keep in abeyance should they get partway through the project next year and find that, you know, there's more rock than was necessary and he's eaten up the contingency, you know, to try and keep this on budget?
I'll have to throw out a lifeline on this one and say that I need to review it because I just don't have a solid recollection, and I'd have to look back at notes, but I don't think the scope was changed by formal resolution of the project. Perhaps Director Aslan may have a clear recollection of it, but certainly something that could be looked at.
Yes, thank you, Kim and council. The scope of the project that council approved was the full inclusion of all the parts. There was one part of the tender that was for provisional items, and that's what you may be speaking to.
Yes.
Those provisional items are only spent in the if they encounter those special conditions, such as they hit unexpected rock. Even though we've done significant geotechnical work to try to figure it out, sometimes there's items that pop up. And we do have placeholders in the provisional items that will only be used in a special circumstance when those items are actually encountered by surprise. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it is. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, hear none. All in favor? Carried.
Fantastic.
Okay, the bylaw 64/2020. Being the bylaw to enter into a contribution agreement with Her Majesty the Queen and the Right of Ontario, as represented by the Minister of Transportation, for funding under the Connecting Link program with respect to reconstruction of Stewart Street, Highway 60, be read a first time and deemed to have been read a second time. Mover, please. Councillor Coolidge, second by Councillor Evans. Again, any questions or comments on this? Okay, all in favor? Carried. The bylaw 64/2020, being the bylaw to enter into a contribution agreement with Her Majesty the Queen in the Right of Ontario, as represented by the Minister of Transportation, for funding under the Connecting Link program with respect to reconstruction of Stewart Street, Highway 60, be read a third time and be passed. Again, any questions or comments on it? Okay. And I guess it'd be fair to say, Director Aslan, that is a $3 million grant.
That's correct. And upon execution of the transfer payment agreement, that will initiate milestone 1, which is a good portion of the funding. So it's up to $3 million. And the eligible cost for the project is 3.9 plus other ineligible components. So yes, a $3 million grant from MTO.
Thank you. Okay. Did I ask for all in favor? No, all in favor. Carried. Is there any new or unfinished business? Revimo.
Yes, thank you. Got some really good news. It's hot off the press. As you know, there has been some struggles with the county official plan. Today, we were informed that the County of Renfrew has been granted exemption status, which allows the county to approve its own amendments to the official plan, and they don't have to go to the minister as such. There's only 120 municipalities in Ontario that has that. The county's been after that for some time. And so we're very pleased with that. And you have to give special recognition to Minister Yakubuski and Minister Clark. They met in a very casual setting with the warden, with Mr. Morrow, with the chair, Bob Sweet, with Charles Cheeseman, and the director, Craig Kelly, a number of times, and their staff to try and work this out. So this is a very progressive thing for the county. And just to give you an idea what it means, by the end of September, it'll go to county council. There's a work plan where staff prepares OPA 31. There are a number of issues the county has raised that the ministry hadn't addressed in the plan that they passed in the middle of COVID, unbeknownst to us. And so we have the opportunity to maybe make some solutions come from that are beneficial to our community. So that will be presented likely near the end of November by staff to council. Then we'll do a presentation of the information to the public, notices of public meeting and agency comments towards the end of November. We're expecting to have at least one virtual public meeting in January or February 2021 to talk about what the changes are. And we think they're more reflective of the needs of our community than the present document that was approved by the province. With that, in March and April, staff will then report back to County Council on Development and Property with the results of the meeting and possible changes to the draft. And at that point, then we would adopt it April or May of 2021. And then, of course, there's the 20-day appeal period for people to send it to the LPAT. And then at that point, we're then waiting for minister approval. And then from that day on, the county will have the ability to process its own amendments without minister's approval, subject to, as always with everybody else, following the provincial policy standards and good land use planning. I know, I don't see Mr. Withers on here. He's probably cringing with how I'm describing the process, but is subject to provincial law and regulation under the provincial policy standards, the Planning Act, Condominium Act, all those other acts that we deal with now. So it's a good news story, or the start of a good news story. We won't know for sure what it looks like until the end of May, but we have a real chance to fashion some of the things that are important into a document from our community that guides us for the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay, any questions or comments on that? Councillor Hines.
Sorry, I just have another thing to mention, but I have no questions on that. That's really good news in regard to some of the things that are in that plan in regard to the numbers that we can have. So that's good news.
Okay. Well, I'm very pleased with that news too, Revimo. That was a bit of a worry because originally we could only grow by 906 people by 2036. And that's not realistic at all. So now we can go to work and start to put a plan together, as to where our future is, and have local control is that's a big deal. It's a big deal. So thank you very much for that report. Any other questions or comments or new business? Councillor Hines.
I was just wondering if I could ask Chief Welsh to speak to the remembrance ceremony that he's putting together, or event that he's putting together for September the 11th. Would that be all right?
Absolutely.
Your worship? Sure. Chief Welsh.
I'm trying to get on,
Come
but
in.
apparently my video has been stopped by the host.
Oh,
So absent video, we'll just hear the voice from above. We're coming up onto the 19th anniversary of the attacks on the World Trade Centers. Oh, I have that option now. So this coming Friday, we will be having a moment of silence, which has been the typical process that fire departments have remembered this event for the last almost 20 years. We will be pulling out the pieces of apparatus and we will be socially distancing our firefighters at the front of the fire hall at about 5 minutes to 10. We will also lower the Canadian flag at that point in time, and at 1 minute to 10, which was consistent with the time that the South Tower collapsed, we will be observing a minute of silence. At the end of that minute, we'll raise the flag back up to full staff and probably draw the vehicles back into the apparatus bays and continue on with our duties. But this is our opportunity as the fire service within Canada and within the town of Renfrew, as well as any of the citizens that would like to partake of the opportunity to acknowledge the significant loss of life that happened on that day. Not only emergency responders, but also the civilian life count, which we're looking at about 3,500 to 3,600 people on that day, as well as the subsequent loss of life as a result of the diseases that those that were in the process of trying to rescue and then in the cleanup portions of the World Trade Center event have suffered as a part of that. So we invite everyone who would like to join us to be here. We're hoping that people can gather around 5 to 10 and we'll have that opportunity to pay tribute to those who have been the victims of that event.
You'll shoot off a formal request on.
Yes, I had the deputy clerk put it on social media on the weekend, and so I will definitely send an email around to all members of council and all senior staff to invite them to that.
Thank you. Anything else? Councillor Hines again.
just on that topic, I just want to say thank you very much to Chief Welsh for once again putting that together. I think it's important to reflect on that, and certainly as Canadians to pay tribute to that. We did have some Canadians that were in that World Trade Center. So again, thank you, Chief Welsh, for doing that and putting that event together.
Okay. Anything else? Last call. Okay, hearing nothing. The bylaw 68-2020 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the council. The corporation of town of Renfrew for the meeting held September 8th, 2020, be read a first time and deemed to have been read a second time. Mover, please. Councillor Hines, second by Councillor Colas. All in favor? Carried. The bylaw 68-2020 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the council of the corporation of town of Renfrew, the meeting held September 8th, 2020, be read a third time and be passed. Mover, please. Councillor Colas, second by Councillor Evans. All in favor? Carried. We do now adjourn and it is 9:07. Thank you. You guys all have a good evening.
Good night, everybody. This is